Story 1. The town of Mobile, Alabama, had been quiet for over a decade. But that peace was shattered one hot July afternoon when Detective Darnell Kendrick found himself standing face to face with a ghost. A woman he buried. A woman he thought he would never see again. A woman he swore was dead. Or so he thought. The weight of the years hung heavy on Darnell's shoulders. Each day spent mourning the wife he lost. Each day that stretched into years of unanswered questions. Carmen Kendrick was gone. Or was she? The truth he thought he knew was about to shatter. He hadn't asked for this, hadn't looked for it. But there she was, alive, standing before him in the most unexpected of places. Georgia, miles from the life she left behind in Mobile. Darnell's heart raced as his eyes locked onto the screen of his phone in the dim, quiet hotel room. A photo. A moment captured in time. Carmen, smiling. Her smile as bright as it had been when they first met. But this time, there was someone else with her. A stranger. A man Darnell knew well. Jamal J. Blackwell. A name that haunted the FBI's most wanted list. A name Darnell had thought he'd never have to hear again. For years, Jamal had been a ghost himself, disappearing after countless crimes linked to illegal dealings, trafficking, and weapons smuggling. Now here he was, in a picture, beside the woman Darnell had lost. The woman who, in 2012, he thought he buried. What was going on? Why was Carmen, the love of his life, standing beside a wanted criminal? The questions flooded Darnell's mind, each one darker than the last. The questions demanded answers, but the answers seemed too impossible to comprehend. Carmen? Alive? Jamal? Connected? And why now? What had happened in those 10 years? Why hadn't she returned? Darnell clenched his fists, the questions weighing down on him. A part of him wanted to believe this was a mistake, a miscommunication. But deep down, he knew it wasn't. His wife, his Carmen, was no longer the woman he had buried. What was she hiding? And why had she chosen this life, with a man like Jamal, instead of coming back to the family she abandoned? There was only one way to find out. Darnell had no choice but to confront the truth, even if it meant confronting the woman he once loved, the man who had stolen everything from him, and the dark past that had followed them both. It had been 10 years since the tragic day he thought his life was ripped apart by a fatal accident. Carmen had been gone. Dead. A car crash so horrific it left no room for doubt. But here he was, staring at her, across a state line, in a different life. What had happened to Carmen? What had really happened to the woman he once knew? And why was she with Jamal J. Blackwell, the fugitive who was responsible for so much destruction? The questions burned in Darnell's mind, and he knew that the answers would not be easy to hear. But he had no choice. He had to uncover the truth. Born and raised in the heart of Mobile, Alabama, Darnell Kendrick was a man molded by duty and family. He came from a long line of law enforcement officers. His father, James Kendrick, a retired cop who had served in the Mobile Police Department for over 30 years. Growing up, Darnell watched his father put on his uniform every day, a symbol of unwavering commitment. It was a life that demanded sacrifice, but it was one Darnell was proud to follow. In the Kendrick family, justice wasn't just a career, it was a way of life. Raised in the church, Darnell learned early the value of family, loyalty, and doing what's right no matter the cost. He wasn't one to make enemies or get caught up in drama. His life was focused, and he believed in hard work. He met Carmen Turner during a routine police call at a local news station where she worked as a journalist. Carmen was captivating, smart, bold, and with an energy that seemed to light up every room she entered. She had a way of drawing people in. It didn't take long for Darnell to fall for her, deeply and wholeheartedly. Carmen, on the other hand, was equally swept away by Darnell's calm, dependable nature. They seemed to complement each other perfectly. Their life together was what many would call a fairy tale, a beautiful marriage, a cozy home, and a son, Deshaun Kendrick, who was their pride and joy. Deshaun, just 5 years old at the time, was the light of their lives, with his bright eyes and infectious laughter. Darnell had always dreamed of a family, but having Deshaun made everything more real than he could have imagined. His love for Carmen was the core of everything he did, and he would have done anything to protect his family. He believed in the future. He believed in the dream they were building together. But even the most perfect dreams have cracks, and Darnell would soon learn that his life was far from perfect. Carmen Turner was not the typical small-town woman. From a young age, she had a fire inside her, a hunger for more than what her upbringing offered. She wasn't content just being another face in the crowd. She wanted to make a name for herself. She had the intelligence, the ambition, and the drive to make it happen. After graduating from the University of Alabama, Carmen found her calling as a local journalist, quickly becoming well-respected in her field. Her work ethic was unmatched, and she climbed the ladder faster than anyone could have predicted. But Carmen wasn't just about her career. She was fiercely independent. She believed in carving out her own path, even if it meant challenging the expectations of those around her. This independence had always been a part of her, even when she married Darnell. On the surface, their marriage seemed ideal, a beautiful union of two people who loved each other. But beneath the surface, there were tensions that Darnell never fully understood. Carmen's ambitions stretched far beyond what Darnell had envisioned for their family. She was constantly pushing to do more, to be more than just a journalist, more than just a wife and mother. She dreamt of a bigger life, one that Darnell struggled to keep up with. Carmen had always admired Darnell's dedication to his job, but she couldn't help but feel that she was suffocating in a life that seemed to demand nothing but conformity. Her need for freedom, for something more, began to grow. She didn't want to just be the woman behind the man. She wanted to be the woman in front of her own story. That's when she met Jamal Blackwell. He was different from anyone she had ever met. There was something magnetic about him. Carmen wasn't sure what it was at first, but she couldn't deny the pull. Jamal represented the excitement, the adventure, the life she craved. He was everything her safe, predictable life with Darnell wasn't. Jamal J. Blackwell. Jamal Blackwell, or simply Jay, grew up on the rough streets of Atlanta. Born into a world where crime was more common than opportunity, Jay's early years were defined by survival. His father was an absent figure, leaving Jamal to learn the ways of the street from an early age. He joined a gang when he was just a teenager, caught up in a web of drugs, violence, and deceit. But even in the heart of that chaos, Jamal always dreamed of more. He was intelligent, quick-witted, and knew how to talk his way out of just about any situation. He wasn't content with being just another street thug. He had bigger plans. By his early 20s, Jamal started to transition away from his gang ties, using his criminal knowledge to build a seemingly legitimate business empire. On the surface, Jamal was a well-dressed, smooth-talking businessman, managing a chain of upscale restaurants and clubs. But the real money came from the operations he was running in the background: human trafficking, weapons smuggling, money laundering, and more. By the time he met Carmen, Jamal had successfully built a network of influence and power. He knew how to make people believe in him, how to make them trust him, how to make them feel safe. Carmen, drawn to his charisma, didn't realize the danger she was stepping into. She was mesmerized by the life Jamal could offer her, a life that seemed so far removed from her mundane existence in Mobile. What Carmen didn't know was that Jamal was on the run. The FBI had been hunting him for years, and his past was filled with secrets that could destroy everything if they were ever uncovered. Jamal was a man living on borrowed time, constantly looking over his shoulder. But for Carmen, he was everything she had ever wanted. And for Jamal, Carmen represented something he had never had: true, undying love, a connection that wasn't just about business. But neither of them knew just how far the lies would go, or the consequences of the decisions they were about to make. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, but Darnell had no idea what lay ahead. What he didn't know was that his wife, the woman he thought he knew inside and out, was about to make a decision that would change everything, and in ways he could never have imagined. As Carmen's relationship with Jamal deepened, and as the lies began to stack up, their world would collide in the most unexpected of ways, setting off a chain of events that would forever alter their lives. It was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. And for Darnell, the life he thought he had with Carmen would never be the same again. On December 4th, 2012, Darnell Kendrick received the call no one ever wants to hear. It was late, the night air thick with humidity, the kind of heavy heat only Mobile could offer. The voice on the other end was frantic, disconnected, telling him there had been a car accident on the outskirts of town. Darnell didn't know who was involved, but when he heard the details about the location, the condition of the car, the fire, he felt a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach. He wasn't prepared for what awaited him when he arrived at the scene. As Darnell pulled up, he saw the glowing red and orange of flames licking at the sky. The car was beyond recognition, consumed by the fire, the heat so intense it made the air shimmer. The firefighters had already begun their work, but there was nothing left to salvage. The body inside was unrecognizable, nothing more than charred remains. His heart pounded in his chest, but there was a part of him still hoping, still wishing it was a mistake. He approached the wreckage, each step feeling heavier than the last. And then he saw it, among the ashes and debris, the one thing he could still recognize. A gold necklace, twisted and singed with the engraving that he had put there himself. Deshawn's mom. His wife's necklace. The necklace Carmen always wore, the one that had been a part of her since they'd gotten married. Darnell's breath caught in his throat. It was the final confirmation. The piece of the puzzle that shattered every ounce of hope he had left. His wife, Carmen. The woman he had loved more than anything. The woman who had been the foundation of his life was gone. It wasn't just a crash anymore. It wasn't just an accident. It was real. It was devastating. It was final. Carmen Kendrick was dead. The funeral was a blur, a haze of faces and mournful voices. Darnell stood there, a shell of the man he had been, his heart ripped wide open. He tried to be strong for Deshawn, for his son, who was now left without a mother. But every word of sympathy, every hug, every tear shed for Carmen, felt like an echo. The grief was suffocating, and the finality of it all hung heavy in the air. They said it was an accident, a tragic, unfortunate incident. There was nothing to investigate, nothing to question. The case was closed. Carmen had died in a horrible crash, and that was that. But for Darnell, that didn't feel like the truth. He couldn't understand how something so sudden, so cruel, could have happened to the woman he had built his entire world around. She was gone, and Darnell had to face the fact that he would never see her again. Or so he thought. The next few years passed in a fog. Darnell threw himself into his work, his badge, and his duties, becoming his only means of survival. But no matter how many cases he worked on, no matter how many criminals he put behind bars, the pain of losing Carmen never left. It followed him. It haunted him. It was in every quiet moment, every empty space at the dinner table, every time Deshawn would ask when Mommy was coming back. Darnell would smile through the ache and tell his son that Mommy was in heaven, that she was always watching over them. But inside, he was breaking. His world had been turned upside down, and the quiet ache of grief turned into a deep, insistent pain that never faded. He couldn't move on. He couldn't forget. He didn't know how. And then there was Deshawn. Watching his son grow up without his mother felt like an unbearable weight on his chest. The boy looked more like Carmen every day, the same smile, the same laugh. Darnell saw flashes of Carmen in every moment, every milestone, and in each one he felt her absence more keenly. His love for his son was endless, but the hole in his heart remained. It was an ache that couldn't be filled. He had buried his wife. He had buried the love of his life. And as the years dragged on, Darnell came to terms with the fact that his life would never be the same. He never stopped grieving. He never stopped missing Carmen. And he never questioned the accident. Until one day he would be forced to. Until one day he would come face to face with the truth. In July 2023, Darnell Kendrick, now 41, was in Georgia with his son Deshawn, trying to escape the weight of a decade of grief. It had been a long time since Carmen's death, but the pain still lingered. Darnell had put everything into raising Deshawn, ensuring his son grew up strong, loved, and well cared for. But after all those years, Darnell realized neither of them had ever truly taken a break. Deshawn had asked for a vacation, and Darnell agreed. He knew they needed it. This was their first trip, their first real chance to step away from the constant reminders of the life they had lost. They chose a quiet seaside town on the Georgia coast, hoping to find some peace and a brief reprieve from the storm that had been their lives. It was a small town, quiet and laid back, just what they needed to relax. That evening, they went out for dinner at a local restaurant, the sun dipping below the horizon and casting a warm glow across the water. Darnell and Deshawn sat at a table by the window, their plates barely touched, as they chatted about anything and everything. It was supposed to be a peaceful evening, but then something caught Darnell's attention. A woman across the room. At first, he thought nothing of it, just another face in the crowd, nothing out of the ordinary. But then, as if struck by lightning, Darnell's eyes locked onto hers. It was the smile, that familiar, radiant smile that could light up any room. It was the laugh, a sound he hadn't heard in years, yet it was as clear as if she were sitting right next to him. The way she carried herself, the grace, the confidence. It was all too familiar. His heart stopped. He felt his blood run cold as recognition hit him. It was Carmen, alive, unchanged, standing there as if nothing had ever happened, like the years had never passed. And she wasn't alone. She was with someone. A man. Darnell's breath caught in his throat as his gaze locked onto the man at her side. His body tensed, the familiar feeling of dread washing over him. It wasn't just any man, it was Jamal J. Blackwell. The same man Darnell had heard of for years, the fugitive wanted by the FBI for crimes he could never escape: human trafficking, arms smuggling, organized crime. Jamal had been a ghost for a long time, slipping through the cracks of the law, disappearing without a trace. But here he was, standing right in front of Darnell, smiling, relaxed, as if he hadn't been on the run for nearly a decade. The man Darnell had hoped he'd never have to cross paths with again. The man who had been the shadow lurking in the background of Carmen's disappearance. For a moment, Darnell's mind went blank, his heart racing as everything he thought he knew about his wife and their life together began to crumble. What was happening? How was this possible? How could Carmen, the woman he had buried, the woman who had been dead for 10 years, be standing there, alive and well? And why was she with Jamal Blackwell, the man who had been involved in so much darkness? The questions bombarded Darnell, his pulse hammering in his ears. He couldn't take his eyes off them. Carmen, with Jamal laughing carefree like nothing had changed. It was too much to comprehend, too much to process all at once. But there it was, right in front of him. Carmen had been alive this whole time. She hadn't died in that crash. She hadn't been in that wreckage. And the most painful part of it all, she had been living this life with Jamal Blackwell. A life Darnell had never been a part of. The man who had taken everything from him was standing right there with her. As Darnell sat frozen at the table, his mind raced with disbelief and anger. How could Carmen do this to him? To their son? The shock was overwhelming, but beneath it all was a simmering rage. The woman he had loved, the woman he had sacrificed everything for, had betrayed him. Betrayed their family. The life he had rebuilt after her death had been built on a lie. The truth was more devastating than anything he could have ever imagined. He had lived with the belief that his wife was gone, that the love of his life had been ripped away in an accident. But the reality was far worse. She had chosen this life. She had chosen Jamal Blackwell. And now here they were, in this small seaside town, living their lives, leaving Darnell to pick up the pieces of the world they had shattered. The anger rose in Darnell's chest, the betrayal cutting deeper than anything he had ever felt. But even through the rage, one question remained at the forefront of his mind. Why? Why had Carmen disappeared? Why had she faked her death? And why was she with Jamal? These questions would burn through Darnell, pushing him toward a confrontation that would force Carmen to face the truth of what she had done. But that moment had not yet arrived. For now, Darnell could do nothing but sit there, watching as the woman he had loved, the woman he had thought he buried, continued to live on in a life that seemed so foreign, so far removed from everything he knew. For days, Darnell's world revolved around Carmen and Jamal. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every waking moment was spent obsessing over them. He tracked their every move, watching from a distance as they went about their lives like nothing had ever happened. They weren't hiding. They were living openly, moving through the world with a sense of freedom that Darnell had never seen before. They went out to restaurants, laughed in public, enjoyed quiet walks along the shore. Everything that Darnell had lost with Carmen was now theirs. The sight of them together, so carefree, tore at him. How could she have done this? How could Carmen, the woman he had spent years building a life with, have just walked away without a word? The pain of the betrayal was suffocating, but the unanswered questions were the ones that consumed him the most. Why? Why had Carmen faked her death? How? How had she managed to keep this secret for so long? And most of all, why with him? Jamal Blackwell, a man Darnell knew all too well from the reports, a man who had caused so much destruction. Yet here he was, standing by Carmen's side as if he was part of her new life. Darnell couldn't make sense of it. How could she choose this life over the one they had? He wasn't just angry, he was confused, heartbroken, betrayed in a way that no one could have ever prepared him for. He spent days piecing together the fragments of their new life, each detail more painful than the last. Carmen had been living under a new identity, using a different name, in a different town, far from everything she had ever known. She had built a life with Jamal, a life that seemed as far removed from Darnell's as possible. He had to know the truth. He couldn't just walk away without answers. One evening, after days of tracking them, Darnell found himself in front of a small hotel on the edge of town. The lights dimmed, the air thick with the kind of tension that only a confrontation could bring. He'd followed Carmen and Jamal to the hotel, and now the time had come. It was time to confront her. But Darnell wasn't interested in shouting and fighting. He didn't want to give in to the rage that threatened to consume him. No, what he needed now was the truth, and he knew the only way to get it was through cold, calculated questions. So he waited. He watched as Carmen and Jamal entered the hotel room, then waited for the silence to settle in before he moved. Darnell stood outside the door for what felt like an eternity, gathering his thoughts, steeling himself for what he was about to do. And then, with a deep breath, he knocked. The door creaked open. Carmen stood there, her face a mixture of shock and something deeper, guilt, regret, fear. She froze for a moment, then took a step back, letting him in. There were no accusations, no angry outbursts. Darnell didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The questions burned in his mind, and he knew he had to ask them now, to get the answers that had haunted him for so long. He looked her in the eyes. "Why, Carmen?" His voice was steady, but his heart was breaking. "Why did you leave? Why did you fake your death?" Carmen's eyes welled with tears. She looked away for a moment, as if trying to gather the strength to speak. Then finally her voice broke. "I had to do it, Darnell." She took a shaky breath, her shoulders slumping. "I was suffocating. I needed out. Jamal gave me a way out. I never meant for it to be this way, but you had no idea the pressure I was under. I wanted to leave before it was too late. For all of us." Darnell's heart clenched as the words spilled out of her. The betrayal felt like a blow to the chest. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had spent years mourning her, believing she was gone. He had raised their son, trying to hold everything together, trying to fill the void that her death had left. And all along, she had been out there, living her life with him. With Jamal. Darnell's voice caught as he asked, "What do you mean? What pressure?" Carmen looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of shame and sorrow. "You don't know what it was like, Darnell. You had your job, your badge, your purpose. But I was trapped. My life was suffocating me. I couldn't breathe. Jamal, he offered me a way out. A new life. A new beginning. I thought I was doing the right thing. But I never meant for it to get this far. I never meant to hurt you." Darnell's mind reeled as Carmen continued. The story that had been so carefully crafted. The life she had built with Jamal. It was all falling apart in front of him. Carmen explained how the accident had been staged. How she had planned everything from the moment she decided to leave. The fake wreck. The staged body. The life insurance that would give her the financial freedom she needed to disappear. It had all been a calculated escape. A plan set in motion to break free from the life she had with Darnell. And Jamal. He had been her partner in this elaborate lie from the start. He had been the key to it all. Carmen had disappeared. Had left her son and her husband behind. Not because she was in danger, but because she wanted out. She had been living a lie for almost 10 years. A lie that had kept her away from the family she had sworn to protect. Darnell's heart shattered as he processed the weight of it all. The woman he had loved. The woman who had once been his world, had chosen to turn her back on him and their son. And for what? For a life with a man like Jamal? It was too much to bear. The pain of her betrayal cut deeper than anything Darnell had ever experienced. It felt like he had been stabbed in the chest, each word from Carmen's lips twisting the knife. But as she finished her confession, Darnell's mind was already spiraling. The truth was clearer now, but it didn't make the hurt go away. She had built a new life, a new identity, and had left them all behind. His wife, his Carmen, had chosen freedom at the cost of everything they had built together. The weight of it all hung heavily in the air as Darnell stood in front of her. He had wanted answers. Now he had them. But the pain of those answers was far worse than the questions ever could have been. The truth was too much for Darnell to bear. The pain of Carmen's betrayal, the weight of the years he had spent grieving a woman who had never truly been gone, it tore at him from the inside out. His heart, once filled with love for the woman he thought was his soulmate, was now consumed with rage. As Carmen stood there, tears streaming down her face, her apology meaningless in the face of what she had done, she reached for her phone. She dialed Jamal's number, her hands shaking as she held the device to her ear. "Jamal's on his way," Carmen said softly, her voice trembling. Darnell didn't need to hear it. He already knew. He could feel the weight of Jamal's presence, even before the man walked through the door. The man who had stolen everything from him. The man who had stood beside Carmen, laughing and living a life that should have been his. Darnell's hands balled into fists, the rage bubbling up from deep within him. He couldn't stop it. The pain, the betrayal, the lies, it all came crashing down on him in that one moment. And when Jamal walked in, with that smug grin on his face, acting like he owned the world, Darnell snapped. Jamal looked around the room, unfazed, as if he knew exactly who he was dealing with. His confidence was infuriating. He was untouchable in his mind. Darnell didn't care anymore. He wasn't the same man who had loved Carmen, who had fought for their family. That man was gone. This man, standing before Jamal, was someone else. a man driven by pain and a hunger for justice. Without a word, Darnell pulled the gun from his waistband. He aimed it at Jamal, his hands steady despite the chaos raging inside him. In a flash, 2 gunshots rang out. Jamal's body jerked, then crumpled to the floor, his eyes wide with shock, his mouth gaping as he tried to comprehend what had just happened. Carmen screamed, her voice high-pitched with terror, as Jamal fell, lifeless, onto the floor. But Darnell wasn't finished. He was beyond the point of reason. The betrayal, the decade of lies, the woman who had once meant everything to him now standing in front of him, the truth finally uncovered. He couldn't stop. He couldn't stop the fury, the raw emotion that was tearing through him like a storm. Without hesitation, Darnell pulled the trigger again. The gunshot echoed through the hotel room, the noise deafening in the small space. Carmen's scream cut off, replaced by a haunting silence. She fell to her knees beside Jamal's lifeless body, her face a mask of horror and regret. Darnell stood there, the weight of his actions hanging over him, his breath heavy in the quiet room. The anger that had fueled him just moments before began to fade, replaced by a cold emptiness. What had he done? What had become of him? His world had shattered in an instant, but it was too late to turn back. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the sound of Darnell's labored breathing. His hands were shaking, the weight of what he had just done sinking in. He had killed them both, Carmen and Jamal, and in doing so, he had destroyed the last remnants of the life he had once known. The public reaction was swift and unforgiving. The case was all over the news. Detective kills wife and fugitive ex-friend in hotel room flashed across headlines, and soon the media frenzy was in full swing. Darnell became the subject of a national debate. Opinions were split. Some saw him as a man pushed to the brink, a man who had been betrayed by the loved and was forced to seek his own justice. Others saw him as a murderer, a man who had taken the law into his own hands and paid the ultimate price for his actions. The media couldn't get enough of the story. People on social media debated the ethics of his actions. Was it self-defense? Was it revenge? Or was it something darker, something deeper? But one thing was certain. Darnell Kendrick's life would never be the same again. The trial was a spectacle. The courtroom was filled with tension as the prosecution painted Darnell as a cold-blooded killer, while his defense team argued that he was a victim of circumstances, a man who had been betrayed and pushed too far. Deshaun, Darnell's son, was brought in to testify, his small frame sitting in the witness stand, his eyes filled with confusion and heartbreak. He loved her, Deshaun said, his voice breaking, but now I'll grow up without either of them. It was the moment that turned the entire courtroom silent. Darnell's fate was sealed. The jury deliberated for days, and when the verdict came down, it was a sentence that would echo through the rest of his life. 40 years to life. It was a sentence that Darnell knew he would have to carry with him. But it was also a sentence that was both a punishment and a consequence of his actions. But his story wasn't over. Years passed, and in the quiet confines of his prison cell, Darnell's mind was consumed with the weight of his choices. He would never again walk free. But the question still lingered. Had he done the right thing? Was there any redemption for a man who had lost everything? As Darnell sat in his cell, one thing was clear. He was a man broken by betrayal, by love, by loss. And the world he had once known, the man he had once been, would never be coming back. The past was gone, and now he would have to live with the choices he had made, with the life he had destroyed. The world would move on, but Darnell Kendrick would remain a prisoner of his own actions, forever haunted by the ghost of his past. Deshaun's story at just 16 years old, Deshaun Kendrick had already lived through more trauma than most people experience in a lifetime. The boy who had once been full of life, with an infectious smile and boundless energy, was now burdened with a grief no child should ever know. His father, Darnell Kendrick, had been convicted of double homicide after killing Deshaun's mother, Carmen, and the man she had betrayed him with, Jamal Blackwell. Deshaun had lost both parents in one fell swoop, the mother he thought he knew, the father he had admired, the man who had raised him with love, even as his mother's absence left a hole in their lives. But now, his father was a murderer, and Deshaun was left to deal with the aftermath of it all. After the trial, Deshaun was placed in the custody of his aunt, Eleanor Kendrick, Darnell's sister. Eleanor had always been a stabilizing force in Deshaun's life, but she was now tasked with raising him in the wake of his father's actions. Eleanor tried her best, but the boy she had known was different now. The joy he once had was gone. Deshaun was constantly at war with himself, caught between the memory of the man who had raised him and the man who had taken the lives of the people he once loved. How could he reconcile the father, who had always been there for him, with the man who had committed such horrific acts? The conflict inside him was crushing. He loved his father despite everything, but he couldn't ignore the truth. His life had been irrevocably changed, and he didn't know who to be anymore. Who was he now that the world he had known had shattered? Was he the son of a man who loved and protected him, or was he the son of a murderer? His identity felt like it had been ripped apart. As the years passed, Deshawn struggled to find his place. He buried his emotions beneath a facade of anger and defiance. He couldn't trust anyone, and the relationships that once gave him comfort now felt strained and distant. He found solace in school and sports, but those activities were only temporary distractions. At night, when the world was quiet, he would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the memory of his father's voice, of the love he had once felt, and of the violence that had followed. His grief manifested in small ways, ripping up his school assignments, snapping at his aunt, pushing away the few friends who tried to get close. He couldn't escape the pain. No matter how hard he tried to move forward, he couldn't outrun the shadow of his father's actions. The world saw him as the child of a killer, and that label was something Deshawn couldn't shake. But it wasn't just the outside world that he had to contend with. It was the internal battle of loving someone who had done something unforgivable. Carmen's fate was never fully clear. The truth of what had driven her to leave her family, to fake her death, was something that Darnell had never truly understood. The confession she had given him was an attempt to explain, but it didn't make the betrayal any easier to accept. What had truly been going through her mind? Had she regretted her decision? Had she realized the pain she had caused? Or had she moved on completely, leaving her past behind for a new life with Jamal? There was never any closure for Darnell, or for Deshawn, about Carmen's fate. She had left them both without warning, without explanation, and even in death she had taken the answers with her. Had she felt remorse for the years she spent lying, for the pain she caused her family? Or had she simply moved on, fully embracing the new life she had built with Jamal? The fact that Carmen's true feelings were unknown left a gaping wound in the hearts of those she had left behind. Darnell's anger was fueled by the thought that Carmen might never have regretted her actions, that she had walked away without ever considering the consequences. But Deshawn, the boy who had lost his mother and father, was left wondering if his mother had truly loved him, or if she had abandoned him for a life she felt was more deserving. Was Carmen truly gone, or was there a part of her still out there, regretting her choices? In the end, the mystery of Carmen's motivations would remain unsolved, and her fate would always be tied to the choices she had made, a betrayal that would ripple through the lives of those she left behind forever. Darnell's fate was sealed the moment the verdict came down. He had killed Carmen and Jamal in a moment of blind rage, and there was no escaping the consequences. A sentence of 40 years to life meant that Darnell would never see the outside world again. He had made his choices, and now he would pay the price. But even in prison, Darnell's mind never stopped. He often thought about Deshawn and the life he had stolen from him. The man he had once been, the father he had tried to be, was gone, replaced by the cold reality of the crime he had committed. In the solitude of his cell, Darnell reflected on everything: his love for Carmen, his betrayal, the decisions that led him to this point, and the son who would never know the father he had once been. He wondered if Deshawn would ever forgive him, or if the damage was too great to be undone. The questions haunted him as he faced the years ahead. What kind of man would he be when the years passed? Would he ever find peace, or would the guilt and regret follow him until his last breath? For Deshawn, Carmen's fate was something he could never fully understand. He had never gotten the chance to ask his mother why she had done what she did. Had she loved him at all? Had she regretted her actions? Or had she moved on, leaving him behind with a father who would never be the same? These questions would stay with him, unanswered, as he moved through life, trying to find his place in the world. And for Darnell, the truth of his actions, the truth of the man he had become, would forever haunt him. The aftermath of his choices would echo through the lives of everyone connected to him, his son, his sister, his past, and there was no escaping the fact that the path he had walked had led him to a place where redemption was no longer possible. The family he had once known was gone, and the future that he had hoped for would never come to pass. The weight of his decisions was his to carry for the rest of his life. In the end, betrayal is never simple. The people we trust the most are often the ones who hurt us the deepest. The person who stands by your side through thick and thin, the one you love with all your heart, can turn into the very source of your undoing, and sometimes the cost of uncovering the truth is too great. It's a price that can shatter not just lives, but entire identities. For Darnell Kendrick, the truth came at an unspeakable cost. It cost him the woman he loved, his freedom, and his relationship with his son. Carmen, the woman who had been his world, was gone. Not dead, but gone in a way that was worse than anything he had ever imagined. The woman he had buried, the woman he thought he had lost to a tragic accident, had betrayed him in the cruelest way possible. And when Darnell confronted her, when the truth finally came to light, it tore his life apart. The man who had once been a dedicated detective, a loving husband, and a father was no more. The rage, the hurt, the unrelenting pain took over, and he acted in a way that no one, including himself, could have predicted. He killed Carmen and Jamal, his childhood friend, and the woman he thought was his greatest ally, the woman he thought had been stolen from him. But in that moment of violence, Darnell was no longer a man driven by love. He was a man consumed by betrayal. His world fell apart in those final moments. He went from a man who had everything to a man who had nothing. Deshawn, the son he had raised alone for years, now had to contend with the man who had murdered his mother. The man who had once been his hero, his father, was now just another criminal locked away, facing the consequences of his actions. And for Deshawn, the fallout was just beginning. He had to carry the weight of what his father had done for the rest of his life. And the questions, the unanswered questions about Carmen's motives, would never be fully understood. Did she regret it? Or had she moved on, leaving them both behind for a life with Jamal? We'll never know. The story of Darnell Kendrick is a tragic reminder of the complexities of betrayal, the fragility of love, and the devastating consequences of uncovering the truth. It's a story that asks us all, what would you do if the person you loved most betrayed you? What would you do if you found out the person who had once been your whole world had been living a lie, hiding their true self from you? Could you forgive them? Or would you seek your own justice, just like Darnell did? What would you do if your heart, your trust, had been shattered? The questions are difficult, but they are also the reason we are drawn to stories like Darnell's. They force us to confront our own emotions, our own understanding of right and wrong. They make us ask ourselves how far we would go for love, and when that love turns into something unrecognizable, how much pain we are willing to endure before we take matters into our own hands. Story 2. On a humid Sunday morning in Houston, Texas, a man in a charcoal suit stepped into a church he once helped build. By noon, 3 lives were gone, and the choir never finished their song. The kind of silence that follows a tragedy is different from any other. It holds a weight, a presence, a question that hangs in the air and refuses to settle. The doors of Greater Truth Revival Ministries opened, and with them, the final chapter of a story no one saw coming. It was a Sunday like any other until it wasn't. A congregation that had once prayed together, sung together, now scattered in terror, in disbelief, in grief. The 911 calls flooded the airwaves, sirens screamed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Officers swarmed the building, their lights flashing like a terrible warning. But it was already too late. 3 people were dead. The air was thick with the sorrow of the moment. The choir's final note left unfinished as the questions began to flood in. Why? Why here? Why now? What could turn a man so desperate, so filled with rage, that he would walk into the place he once called home and pull the trigger? But the real question isn't what happened, it's why. And to understand that, we have to go back before the gun, before the betrayal, before the prison sentence, to a love story that was never meant to survive. Malik Devontae Cross, a 38-year-old narcotics detective with the Houston Police Department, was a man defined by principle. Known in his department for his meticulous work, he was the type of officer who could dismantle an entire drug network without ever firing a shot. He didn't just chase down criminals, he outsmarted them, gaining their trust and then pulling the rug out from under them, taking them down quietly but efficiently. Raised by his mother, Eulalia Cross, a retired schoolteacher, Malik grew up with a strong sense of right and wrong. His mother, the steady force in his life, had instilled in him the belief that you could fight for justice and stay true to your integrity, no matter the circumstances. It wasn't long before Malik became one of the department's most respected detectives, his reputation stretching far beyond the Houston city limits. But despite his success, there was always something pulling at him, something he couldn't ignore, a yearning to leave the force and build a life outside of law enforcement. He dreamed of starting his own security firm, helping people protect what mattered most. He had seen the darkness of the streets, the cost of the endless battles, and he was ready to walk away. That's when he met Ayanna Monroe. Ayanna was everything Malik wasn't: open, vibrant, and driven by a deep sense of compassion. A youth social worker with a bright smile and a contagious energy, she ran a non-profit organization called Seeds of Tomorrow, dedicated to providing youths with the guidance and resources they needed to succeed. The two crossed paths when Malik gave a talk to a group of troubled teens, sharing his own experiences and offering a different perspective on life. Ayanna was there, listening intently, always in the background, and there was something about her presence that intrigued Malik. She wasn't like the women he had dated before. There was a warmth in her that made him feel comfortable and understood. Malik was smitten. Within weeks they were inseparable. Ayanna was everything he didn't know he needed: strong, graceful, and driven by a sense of purpose that matched his own in many ways. But as their relationship blossomed, those closest to Malik began to raise concerns. Some of his colleagues, even his friends, couldn't shake the feeling that Ayanna was a little too perfect. "She's polished, Malik, too polished. Watch your back," they warned. But Malik wasn't listening. He was in love, and that was all that mattered. 8 months later they were married. The wedding was beautiful, a celebration of everything they had built together. Their love seemed flawless, the picture perfect, black love story everyone around them admired. And then, a year after their wedding, their daughter Zuri was born. To the outside world, everything was perfect: a loving husband, a devoted wife, a beautiful baby girl. It was the kind of family people looked at with envy. But beneath the surface, beneath the wedding photos and the church dedications, something was shifting. Hidden truths were being buried deep, locked away where no one could see, where no one would suspect. And in the quiet moments, in the spaces where no one else could hear, Malik began to wonder if everything he had built was as perfect as it appeared. But for now, the world saw a family with a bright future, and that was all that mattered. Ayanna Monroe had always been a woman of mystery. To the public, she was a beacon of hope, a social worker, a community leader, the face of Seeds of Tomorrow, the non-profit she ran with a dedication that seemed almost divine. But as the layers peeled away, a darker story began to emerge. A story of a woman who had once walked a dangerous path, a story buried under the weight of carefully crafted lies. In the past, Ayanna had been more than just a social worker. She had been a confidential informant for the federal government, working deep undercover in the world of drugs and crime. Her connection to Maurice Uncle Maud LaCroix, a ruthless drug lord, had begun years ago, long before Malik ever came into her life. It was a relationship born out of necessity, not love, but one that had lasted longer than she had ever planned. When the feds offered her a way out, she took it, but she didn't walk away clean. She turned, betraying her handlers and slipping back into Uncle Mo's dangerous world. Seeds of Tomorrow was never what it appeared to be. It was a way to launder money through fake rehab services and summer camps, a way to move products without raising suspicion. Ayanna had become an expert at hiding in plain sight, weaving a life of goodwill while running operations in the shadows. But as with all things, the truth has a way of surfacing. One day it came crashing down. A shipment from the cartel went missing, and the feds, circling ever closer, were beginning to close in. Panic set in. Ayanna knew she could no longer outrun her past. Her world, so carefully constructed, was on the verge of collapse. In the midst of this storm, she ran to Malik. He was the man she had married, the man she loved, or so he thought. She arrived home in tears, her composure shattered for the first time since they had met. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice quivering. "They're coming for me." Malik's mind raced. He could see the fear in her eyes. He could feel the weight of the words, even if she didn't say them all. But Ayanna didn't confess everything. She didn't tell him about the drugs, about Uncle Mo, about her ties to the cartel. Instead, she spun a story about an ex-boyfriend who had stashed drugs in their home. The lie was convincing. To Malik it made sense. He loved her, he trusted her, and he would protect her at all costs. He believed her. And that belief led him to make a choice that would change everything. With his heart leading the way, Malik took the fall. He claimed the drugs as his own, knowing it would protect Ayanna. He was arrested, his hands cuffed, his world crumbling around him. As the officers led him away, his eyes locked with Ayanna's. She stood there, silent, her expression unreadable. 1,000 questions ran through his mind as he was hauled into the back of the squad car, but no answers came. He was left in the cold, harsh reality of his decision, one that would shatter his life. Before his sentencing, Malik reached out to the one person he thought could help him. Pastor Ezekiel Zeke Ward, his childhood friend, someone he had always turned to in times of trouble. Zeke was a man of faith, a preacher who had always kept his hands clean, someone who had known Malik for years. Malik needed someone to help him make sense of the mess he had found himself in. "Zeke, I did it for her," Malik confessed during one of their final conversations. But as the days passed and the sentencing loomed closer, Malik began to realize the full weight of his actions. He had upheld the law his entire career, had devoted his life to it, and now here he was shackled by it. He had traded his freedom for love, loyalty, and a lie he hadn't even questioned. Pastor Ezekiel Zeke Ward was no stranger to the streets of Houston. He had grown up in 3rd Ward, right alongside Malik, navigating a world filled with temptation, violence, and hardship. Like Malik, Zeke had seen the darkness of the world up close. He had once been a street runner, a young man caught in the vicious cycle of drugs and crime, until he found a new path, a path that led him away from the life that nearly consumed him. Zeke turned his life around and found salvation through faith. He became a preacher, using his past as a testament to the power of redemption. His ministry, Greater Truth Revival Ministries, became a beacon of hope for many, especially in the community he had once called home. Charismatic, respected, and trusted, Zeke was the kind of man who could inspire a room full of people, lifting them up with his words. But his own life was not as simple as the sermons he preached every Sunday. Malik, in his time of need, turned to Zeke for help. With Malik facing the consequences of his actions, he reached out to the one person he thought could support his family, Zeke. "Watch over her," Malik had asked, his voice full of quiet desperation. "Take care of Ayanna and Zuri," Zeke agreed, offering a prayer for Malik before he was led away in handcuffs. It was the kind of promise that Malik thought would bring peace of mind in his darkest hour. Little did he know, it was the beginning of a betrayal that would echo far beyond the walls of the prison. In the 2nd year after Malik's arrest, Zeke's check-ins on Ayanna and Zuri became more frequent, at first just a few times a month, then more regularly, until they were practically daily. It wasn't long before Zeke's visits started to cross the line. By the 3rd year they had crossed the line, Zeke and Ayanna began sleeping. What started as simple check-ins, words of comfort, soon turned into something else entirely. The lines between friendship, loyalty, and betrayal became blurred. As the 4th year rolled around, Ayanna made a decision that would seal the fate of their relationship. She filed for divorce from Malik. She hadn't confessed everything to Malik before, but now the truth was clear, she had moved on. Zeke, the man she had once trusted to help her through the darkest times of her life, was now the one she was turning to. In the 5th year, Zeke confessed his feelings. It was one of those moments that no one ever saw coming, yet everyone should have. "I'm in love with you," Zeke told Ayanna, his voice heavy with emotion. The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment nothing else mattered. He believed it was God's will, that this was his second chance at a family, at a life that had once seemed so far out of reach. By the 6th year, Zeke and Ayanna were married. Zuri, now a young girl, called him Daddy Z. She had accepted him as her father, the man who had stepped into the life that Malik once filled. Ayanna, with a calm finality, told her daughter, "Your real father died inside that place." It was a sentence that cut through the years of lies, a statement so final it left no room for doubt. Zeke preached salvation every Sunday, but in the silence of the night, when no one was watching, he quietly erased the man who had saved them both. He became the father figure in Zuri's life, the husband in Ayanna's, and the preacher in the pulpit. But truth has a way of resurrecting, and in the years that followed, the lies he had carefully built would start to unravel. For in the shadows of the life they had constructed, Malik's name and his story would never be fully buried. No matter how much they tried to forget, the past always has a way of finding its way back into the light. Malik spent the next decade behind bars, his world confined to the cold, sterile walls of USP Beaumont, a federal prison in southeast Texas. The man who once stood tall as a respected detective now found himself at the mercy of a system that did not care for the nuances of right and wrong. 10 years, a lifetime inside, a lifetime of wondering, of trying to hold on to the pieces of a life that had been ripped away in an instant. Malik adapted. He became a tutor for other inmates, a mediator between those who could not see eye to eye. His life inside was not easy, but he managed to carve out a small measure of purpose. Still, every night, when the lights went out and the clanging of metal doors faded into the distance, he found himself staring at a single photo. A photo of Zuri, his daughter, taped to the inside of his locker. The image of her smiling face was a constant reminder of what he had lost and what he might never get back. In his heart, Malik held on to hope. Hope that someday, somehow, he would make contact with Ayana and Zuri, that they would write to him, that they would remember him. But those letters he sent out into the world were never answered. No word from Ayana, no word from Zuri, no word from the life he had once known. His calls went unanswered, his letters returned unopened, and then a few years in Zeke, the man who had promised to watch over his family, who had vowed to protect everything he cared about, blocked him on every front. No calls, no letters, no messages. It was as if Malik no longer existed to them. The pain of rejection was sharp, but it was nothing compared to the blow that came next. Malik's mother, Eulalia, the woman who had raised him with love and discipline, passed away while he was still locked away. The authorities denied his request to attend her funeral. His last chance to say goodbye, to honor the woman who had given everything to ensure he stayed on the right path, taken from him, without hesitation. Malik's grief was suffocating. There was no closure, no way to properly mourn the woman who had been his everything. He sat in his cell, staring out into the empty distance, the weight of his mother's death pressing down on him like 1,000 bricks. Then one day a former cellmate, who had shared a cell with him years ago, walked into the prison during visiting hours. The man, who had recently been released, had come to see Malik. But what he said next would send a shockwave through Malik's soul. "Zeke? Man, he's raising your daughter now. Got your wife too. Even preaches about you, like you are some street legend gone bad." The words hit Malik like a ton of bricks, a blow to the chest that stole his breath away. Zeke, his childhood friend, the man he had trusted with his family, had not only stepped into Malik's life in ways he couldn't have imagined, but he had replaced him. He had taken everything. Malik sat there, frozen, unable to speak. His mind raced as the gravity of the betrayal sank in. Zeke was living the life Malik had once built. He was now the man who held his daughter's hand, the man who shared a bed with his wife, the man who preached in his name, twisting his story into something dark, something unrecognizable. It wasn't just that Zeke had taken his place. It was that Zeke was using Malik's name, his past, his identity, to build his own reputation. He had erased Malik from the lives of those who mattered most, and Malik was left with nothing but silence. In the days and weeks that followed, Malik's world began to crumble. He stopped eating. He stopped sleeping. It was as though the man who had once been so full of life, so full of purpose, had been hollowed out. Inside his cell, under the dim light of a flickering bulb, he began to write. Night after night, he wrote in a small, tattered notebook, the pages filling with nothing but one single word. Why? Over and over again, the word appeared scrawled hastily, but with a deep, aching need for an answer that never came. Why? He asked. Why had Zeke done this to him? Why had Ayana let it happen? Why had he been forsaken by everyone he had ever trusted? The silence of those unanswered questions echoed louder with each passing day. Because betrayal isn't just about what someone does to you. Sometimes it's about what they take from you, and still expect you to stay quiet about it. Malik was trapped in a prison of his own making, one built on love, lies, and loyalty. He had once believed in the goodness of the people closest to him, but now, as he stared at the cold walls of his cell, he realized that he was truly alone, and all he had left were the questions that would never leave him. Why? After serving 10 long years at USP Beaumont for good behavior, Malik was released from prison. The world outside had moved on, but Malik had been left behind. No welcome, no fanfare, no reunion with the life he had once known. He walked out of the prison gates with nothing but the clothes on his back and a quiet resolve. No job waiting for him, no pension to lean on, no family to return to. He was forgotten. The years had passed, but the scars of betrayal still ran deep. His first goal was simple: reconnect with Zuri, the daughter he had loved, the daughter he had fought to protect. But that proved to be an impossible task. Ayana and Zeke had made sure of that. Every attempt to reach out was blocked, every letter returned unread. They had erased him from their lives completely. For a while Malik did nothing. But soon the quiet, empty days filled with rage and confusion. He could not move on without answers. He could not live in a world where his daughter was kept from him, where his name was being used by a man who had betrayed him in the worst possible way. Malik decided to investigate. He knew the church, Greater Truth Revival Ministries, was the center of it all, the place where Zeke now preached, the place where Zuri sang in the choir. So Malik donned a disguise and began to watch from afar. He blended into the crowd on Sundays, sitting in the back, watching the life he had once been a part of unfold before his eyes. The man who had been a detective, a mediator, now sat in silence, recording the sermons where Zeke spoke of choosing God over the streets, using Malik's name to preach lessons about redemption, about the fall of a man who had gone down the wrong path. Zeke's words stung. He spoke of Malik as if he were a distant memory, a street legend who had fallen from grace, an example of what could happen if you didn't choose the right path. But the truth was far more complicated. Malik watched as Zeke, the man who had once promised to protect his family, now took his place in his life. He watched as Zuri, his daughter, sang in the choir, her voice sweet and pure, completely unaware of the ghosts that lingered in the shadows of her life. The sight of her, his little girl, grown now, tore at his heart in ways he couldn't explain. He couldn't just walk away anymore. He needed to know the truth. He needed to be heard. So he bought a burner phone, a device to keep his movements hidden. He began to document everything, every sermon, every betrayal, every step Zeke took to erase him from the lives of those he loved. Every day he wrote in a journal, tracking every moment, every lie. The journal became his lifeline, a way to keep track of the truth that no one else wanted to hear. But as the weeks passed, Malik's resolve only grew stronger. The time for quiet observation was over. His final week in the city was the turning point. He had one last thing to do, one last message to leave behind. He wrote a note, addressed to Zuri, his daughter, the one person who had been the light in his darkest days. It was a simple note, but it held a truth he knew would one day break through. One day you'll understand why the truth hurts more than the lie. With the note left behind, Malik bought a suit, the same suit he had worn to her christening, the day he had promised to protect her with every fiber of his being. The same suit that symbolized the man he once was. It was time. He walked into the church, his heart pounding, his mind focused on the truth that had been buried for far too long. The doors to the church swung open and Malik stepped inside, ready to face the ghosts of his past, ready to confront the man who had taken everything from him and the woman who had let it happen. It was time for the reckoning, time for the truth to finally come to light. It was a Sunday morning like any other at Greater Truth Revival Ministries. The air was thick with anticipation as the congregation settled into their seats. Zeke stood at the pulpit, a beacon of authority, a man of faith who had preached redemption, salvation, and forgiveness for years. Today he was talking about forgiveness, the very thing he had claimed to offer to others, but which, in truth, had been withheld from the one man who needed it most. Ayana sat at the front, glowing, as if the years had softened her, making her the woman she had always dreamed of becoming. Zuri, her daughter, was on the stage, leading the worship. Her voice soared through the church, filling the space with an energy that Malik once believed he would never be without. To the congregation, everything was perfect peace, harmony, redemption. But the stage was set for something no one could have ever imagined. Malik stood at the back of the church, his eyes scanning the room, his heart pounding in his chest. No one recognized him at first. He had changed in the years he had been gone. Time, pain, and loss had transformed him. He slipped into the back row, unnoticed, just one more face in the crowd. Zeke's sermon continued, words flowing from his lips, telling the congregation about the power of forgiveness, about how God could heal even the deepest wounds. But then the sermon took a turn. Zeke's voice grew cold, his words sharpened with a dark edge as he spoke. Some people are too broken to be saved, and that's what prison is for. Malik's breath caught in his throat. The words stung, but they were more than just an insult. They were a personal attack. He had heard those words before. They were the words Zeke had whispered to him in the quiet of his own mind, justifying everything he had taken from Malik. With a calmness that surprised even him, Malik stood up. The room went silent. Eyes turned, murmurs spread, but no one could yet place him. With each step, his heart beat louder in his chest. He walked slowly down the aisle, his body moving as if on autopilot. When he reached the front of the church, he reached into his coat. The cold metal of the Glock 19 felt heavy in his hand, but it was a weight he had carried for far too long. He pulled it out. The room froze. In that moment, time seemed to stretch out, every second feeling like an eternity. 3 shots rang out, breaking the silence like thunder. First, Zeke, right in the chest. The man who had stolen his life, his family, his future, fell to the ground. Then Ayana, the woman who had once promised to love him. The woman who had betrayed him. The woman who had watched him fade away, one shot, straight to the heart. Finally Malik, his hands still gripping the gun, raised it to his own temple. He had come for justice, But in the end he realized justice would never heal the wounds that ran deeper than any bullet ever could. The shot echoed through the church, and as Malik crumpled to the floor, the silence that followed was deafening. Screams filled the air, voices full of horror and disbelief. Bible pages fluttered through the air like confetti, a tragic reminder of the twisted reality that had unfolded in that sanctuary. Zuri's scream pierced through the chaos, cutting through the madness like a knife. She had seen it all, the man who had been her father, the man who had been her hero, and the man who had been taken from her, now lying in a pool of his own blood. Malik died with his eyes open, his last sight the face of the daughter he had never stopped loving. As his breath left him, so did the final chapter of a story written in love, betrayal, and the relentless search for justice. In that moment Malik found his peace, no longer bound by the lies, no longer trapped in the pain of the past. But for Zuri, for Ayana, for Zeke, the reckoning had only just begun. He was a cop, a protector, a husband, a father, a man who chose love over law, and in the end it cost him everything. Some say Malik Cross was a fool, others say he was a martyr, but maybe he was just a man who believed in the wrong people one last time. His story ended in tragedy, a life cut short by betrayal and a quest for justice that could never be fulfilled. His body lay cold on the floor of the church, but the echoes of his pain, his love, and his sacrifices would resonate long after the gunshots faded. The church where Zeke had preached salvation and forgiveness now sat abandoned, the doors locked, the pews empty. The once thriving ministry, built on lies and deception, had crumbled under the weight of truth. No more sermons, no more congregants, no more false promises. The people who once filled its halls had dispersed, unable to reconcile the horrors that had unfolded within its walls. The community, left in the wake of Malik's death, struggled to make sense of the madness. The chaos had shattered families, lives, and memories that could never be restored. Zuri, the daughter Malik had fought to protect, sat in a therapist's office now, a young girl trying to make sense of a world that had torn her apart. Her voice was barely above a whisper as she spoke about her father, the man she would never truly know, the man who had loved her more than anything in the world, but who she could never have a chance to truly love back. The weight of the loss was too much for her to bear. And in the corner of the room, on a table beneath a glass case, sat Malik's notebook, his final testament to a love that never faded. The pages were filled with drawings of Zuri, sketches of the daughter he had never been able to hold again. His words, written with a heart full of regret, still lived in the ink as if he could never truly let go. The police found it after the final moments of that fateful Sunday. His journal, filled with thoughts, dreams, and endless questions, now lay in the hands of those who would never understand the depth of his pain. The notebook was a reminder of a man who had tried to hold on to his humanity in a world that had taken it from him. It was a final cry for justice, a desperate attempt to make sense of the life he had lived and the love he had lost. Malik Cross's story didn't end with his death. It lived on in the questions he left behind, in the heartbreak of a daughter who would never forget him, and in the memories of a man who had once been more than just a cop. He was a man who loved with everything he had. A man who, in the end, paid the price for his devotion to the people he thought he could trust. And as the dust settled, one thing became clear. The line between right and wrong had never been so blurred. For Malik, justice had been elusive. But in the end, his final act, his last moments, would force the world to confront the truth they had all tried to hide. The question now was, who would carry his story forward? Who would remember him for the man he truly was? Because Malik Cross was more than just a victim. He was a symbol of love, sacrifice, and the cost of believing in people who never deserved that trust. How far would you go for love? Would you sacrifice your freedom, your future, your very identity? Malik Cross did, and paid the price. In a world where trust is a fragile thing, and betrayal lurks behind every corner, Malik believed in the one thing he thought could save him: love. But that belief would become his undoing. He gave everything to his career, his integrity, his very self, to those he thought he could count on. But in the end, love wasn't enough to shield him from the lies, the deception, and the darkness that festered within those closest to him. This wasn't just a story about crime or betrayal. It was a story about the lengths one man went to for the people he loved, and the price he paid for that love. Story 3. She thought she had finally found love, the kind that made her feel seen again, the kind that wrapped itself around her like safety after years of silence. Maris Lane had spent most of her life giving, holding the hands of dying patients, putting her children's needs before her own, surviving the grief of losing the only man she ever truly loved. And just when the world had gone quiet around her, this stranger lit up her phone. And her heart. He listened when no one else was calling. He remembered the little things. He said the right words at the right times. And slowly, she let herself believe. She believed that good things could still happen. That even after all this time, someone could look at her and choose her. Not out of pity, but out of want. So she followed that feeling, bought the ticket, packed carefully, told her daughter she was finally living again. And when the plane landed, she sent one message. I made it, baby. I'm at the airport. After that, nothing. No hotel check-in, no calls, no photos, no answers. Only questions. What really happened to Maris Lane after she got off that plane? And who, exactly, was waiting for her on the other side? Maris Lane was born on a stormy Thursday in 1959 in a small, two-bedroom house on the west side of Macon, Georgia. Her mother worked in a school cafeteria. Her father laid bricks during the day and painted signs at night. They didn't have much, but they believed in hard work, prayer, and sitting down together for dinner, no matter what the day had held. Maris was the youngest of four. Quiet, observant, always holding a doll in one hand and a book in the other. She wasn't the loud one in the room, but she noticed everything. The way her father walked in after work and kissed her mother on the forehead without a word. The way her oldest brother left for the army and never came back quite the same. The way grown-ups whispered when they thought the kids weren't listening. She carried those observations with her, tucked them away like loose change in her coat pocket. School came easy to her. She didn't rush to answer questions, but when she did, it was with thought. She was drawn to science, biology especially. Something about the inner workings of the body fascinated her. While her friends talked about being singers or secretaries, Maris said she wanted to be a nurse. And she meant it. When her classmates rolled their eyes at dissections, she leaned in closer. She wanted to understand what made life tick and what happened when it didn't. After high school, she enrolled in a local community college. She paid her own way, working evenings at a grocery store and weekends at the church daycare. It was there, at a Sunday potluck, where she met Thomas Lane. He had just come back from Detroit, where he'd worked in auto parts for a few years. He was tall, with shoulders like a lineman, and hands that always smelled like engine grease. But when he smiled, it softened everything. They dated for 11 months. He picked her up after class. She packed him lunch in foil. They'd sit on her front porch after dinner and talk about the future. He wanted a family. She wanted a home that felt safe. In the spring of '82, they got married in a modest ceremony behind her grandmother's house. There were folding chairs, fried chicken, and 24 mason jars filled with wildflowers. No choir, no big dress, just vows spoken between two people who didn't need much to be happy. Their first child, John, came a year later. She held him against her chest and whispered, "You are the beginning of everything." 2 years after that, Celine was born. A girl with lungs like a trumpet and eyes just like her father's. The house filled up quickly with laughter, with noise, with messes that never stayed cleaned. She worked nights at the hospital and still found a way to make pancakes every Saturday morning. They never had fancy things, but they had each other, and that was more than enough. Thomas worked in auto repair full-time. He was never the type to sit still. Even after long days at the shop, he'd mow the lawn, fix the sink, help with homework. He didn't say "I love you" a lot, but he showed it. Every day. In how he checked the locks before bed. In how he filled the gas tank when hers ran low. In how he stood quietly at the back of church, one hand resting on her shoulder. They weren't perfect. There were bills that got behind. Arguments over things like groceries and chores. But there was trust, and loyalty, and a rhythm they both understood. They were a team, and their home, though small, was full. Years passed. The kids grew. John graduated and left for college in Illinois. Celine earned a scholarship and packed her things for Virginia. The house got quieter, but Thomas was still there, still reading the newspaper with his coffee, still dancing with her in the kitchen when the right song came on the radio. Until the morning he didn't wake up. It was a Sunday, the same day they always went to church together. She found him slumped in his recliner, his cup of coffee still warm, his lips slightly parted like he was mid-sentence. A massive heart attack, they said. Sudden. No warning. 1 minute there. The next. Gone. The silence after his death was different. It wasn't just absence. It was weight. Heavy in every corner. The bed felt too big. Meals didn't taste like anything. The TV stayed off. For the first 6 months, she didn't touch his closet. Couldn't. She'd wake up expecting him to be in the bathroom, brushing his teeth. And every morning she'd have to remember. All over again. She wore black for nearly a year. Not out of obligation, but because it was the only color that made sense. Friends came around at first. They brought casseroles, sent cards, but eventually life moved on for them. And Maris stayed still. The kids called often. They offered to fly her out for holidays. But she always said, "I'm okay, baby, I've got the house to keep me company." Truth was, the house didn't speak back. It creaked. It echoed. But it didn't speak. And in that silence, year after year, Maris started to shrink. Not physically, but in presence. She stopped wearing perfume. Stopped going out just to go out. Her heart didn't hurt the same way anymore. But it didn't hope either. She was still kind. Still gracious. Still the woman who sent birthday cards and remembered anniversaries. But behind her eyes, something stayed tucked away. Quiet. Unread. Waiting. Waiting for a reason. Waiting for something. Or someone. To remind her she was still here. It was a Saturday in late spring when Sonia Blake, Maris' closest friend of over 40 years, stood beneath a trellis of white roses and said I do to a man half her age. 30 years old, tall, fresh-faced, with smooth skin and an eager smile. The ceremony was held at a lakeside vineyard just outside Augusta. The air was warm. The music was soft. Guests whispered their surprise when they first saw the groom. But by the time the vows were exchanged, everyone was clapping like they believed in it. Maris arrived in a soft blue dress, the kind she used to save for Easter Sundays. She wore her hair in curls, tucked just behind one ear, and a silver pin on her lapel that used to belong to her mother. People told her she looked beautiful that day, and she smiled politely, said thank you, even though inside her chest felt tight. She sat near the front during the ceremony, just a few rows from the altar, watching her friend say yes to a new beginning. The minister spoke about second chances, about rewriting the chapters of your life even after the page feels finished. Everyone laughed when Sonia said, "Well, I didn't expect this at 65, and the groom squeezed her hand with all the confidence of someone who believed age didn't mean anything. Maris clapped with the rest of them. She toasted with sparkling cider. She watched Sonia and her new husband's slow dance to At Last, and for a few moments, she let herself get caught up in the celebration. But then came the quiet, the part no one saw, the stillness between songs, the weight of sitting alone at a table while couples took turns on the dance floor, the flash of a camera that captured her mid-blink, hands folded in her lap, a tired smile stretched across her face. Later that night, in the guest room Sonia had arranged for her, Maris stood in front of a mirror and undid her earrings one by one. She took off her shoes, set them gently beside the bed, and looked at her reflection. She didn't see someone who was past her prime. She saw someone who had spent her whole life doing the right thing, taking care of people, building a home, holding down a job, burying the man she loved, raising 2 kids who now lived hours away. She saw someone who still had years left, and no one to share them with. She sat on the edge of the bed and stared at her phone. For a long time she didn't move. Then she unlocked it, opened the app store, and typed in one word, dating. The first app that came up, she downloaded. Then another. Then one more. Her fingers hesitated over the first profile set up, but something inside her pushed forward. She wasn't looking for fantasy. She wasn't chasing something unrealistic. She just wanted to be seen again, wanted to hear someone call her beautiful, and mean it, wanted to have someone to text good morning and good night, to talk about the news, the weather, the ache in her knees when the temperature dropped, anything. For the next hour she set up her profiles, picked out the best pictures she had, some from family cookouts, others from church events. One photo of her holding a pie she baked for the pastor's anniversary. She wrote a bio that was honest, warm, a little shy. Retired nurse, family first, loves jazz, southern food, and meaningful conversations. Looking for companionship, maybe more. She didn't tell anyone, not John, not Celine, not even Sonia. This was hers, a quiet decision, a seed planted in the dark. She didn't expect much that night, just wanted to see what was out there. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that someone had already seen her, someone had already found her profile. Someone who wasn't looking for love, but for something else entirely. And by the time he messaged her, the door had already opened. Narrator. His name was Austin Caleb, or at least that's what the profile said. 23 years old, African-American, broad shoulders, neatly trimmed beard, deep brown eyes that stared into the camera like they were searching for something real. He wore designer t-shirts, posted photos from airports and co-working spaces, and described himself as a traveling tech entrepreneur working remotely across Asia. The bio was short, just enough to sound ambitious without giving away too much. Maris noticed him within minutes. The app flagged their profiles as a 98% match. She didn't reach out first, she never did. But when his message came in just after 6 a.m. the next morning, it caught her completely off guard. "Good morning, Queen. I hope your heart rested well last night." She paused when she read it. Her thumb hovered over the screen. No one had called her Queen before. At least not like that, not with warmth and confidence in the same breath. Most men her age messaged her with dry one-liners or copied quotes that felt like they were sent to everyone. But this felt different. She responded cautiously. He replied right away. What started as casual conversation, simple questions, innocent answers, soon turned into full paragraphs. He asked about her favorite music, what her Sundays looked like, how she spent her retirement. He sent good morning texts before sunrise and checked on her at night. He joked about how jealous he was of her pecan pie recipe and promised he'd fly in just to try a slice. He sent voice notes with a deep, smooth tone that wrapped around each word like a hug. He read short poems, some stolen, some original, but each one made her feel chosen, not just noticed, seen. Within days, they were messaging constantly. She'd check her phone before brushing her teeth, smile at the screen before saying grace. Her friends noticed something had shifted. Her daughter asked, "Mom, why are you always giggling at your phone?" Maris just brushed it off and changed the subject. And then came the first video call. He asked if she was comfortable with it. She said yes, though her hands trembled a little when she adjusted her scarf. The screen connected, and there he was, sitting shirtless in what looked like a modern condo with floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. The lighting hit just right, enough to make him glow. He smiled the moment he saw her face. "Wow, I knew you were beautiful. But this is royalty." Maris covered her mouth with her hand and laughed. She hadn't blushed like that in years. She tilted her head slightly, trying to act casual, but her cheeks burned. They talked for over an hour. About life. About dreams. About what love was supposed to feel like after 60. He said he liked older women. Said they carried wisdom in their eyes and peace in their voice. He told her she reminded him of his favorite teacher in high school. Only softer, more graceful. She didn't know what to say. No one had spoken to her like that since Thomas. That night, she recorded a short voicemail on her phone, one she never meant to share. It was just her, talking into the quiet. "It's not just flirting," she said. "It feels like companionship. Like maybe this time it's real." What she didn't know, what no one around her knew, was that Austin wasn't in tech. He wasn't traveling for business, and he wasn't who he claimed to be. But to Maris, in that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was that someone made her feel like a woman again, like she still had chapters left to write. And so she kept answering. She kept smiling. And slowly she started to believe. For 6 straight weeks, their conversations never skipped a day. Mornings started with a message from Austin. Evenings ended with his voice drifting through her phone speaker like a nightly routine she didn't know she needed. If he didn't call by 9 p.m., she'd wait, holding her phone close, refreshing the screen every few minutes. And when he finally did, sometimes with a quiet, "Hey, I missed you," she'd smile like a schoolgirl, even if her body ached from sitting too long. He made time for her, no matter the hour, no matter the time zone. He said he liked slowing down to talk with someone who didn't rush through life. Said he needed that energy in his world. His messages were tender, sometimes poetic, other times playful. But what drew Maris in wasn't just the attention. It was the stories. He told her about growing up in New Orleans. Said his mother worked double shifts at a hotel, and his father disappeared before he could form a memory. He said he'd been kicked out of his house at 16, slept in his friend's car, and built himself up with nothing but drive and faith. He talked about losing people, about betrayal, about wanting to leave behind everything that had hurt him. He said the tech world saved him, that coding kept his mind busy and traveling kept his heart light, and Maris, she listened to every word like scripture. She told him about her husband, how he passed without warning, how her house grew too quiet after, how she felt like a guest in her own life. She opened up about things she hadn't even told Sonia, about the fear of dying alone, about the dreams she'd shelved when the kids were little, how she once wanted to see the world, but time kept slipping through her hands. Austin never made her feel silly for sharing. He leaned into those moments, told her she had every right to feel what she felt, said she had given her life to others, It was time to give something back to herself. He told her she wasn't finished, that she had chapters left, that a woman like her deserved more than memories. She deserved movement. She deserved excitement. She deserved to live. The way he said it made her believe it. Like it wasn't just empty talk. Like he meant every word. And then one night, just after 2 a.m., as they talked while she sat curled on the couch in her robe, he mentioned Thailand. He said he was there for a short-term project with an international startup. Something to do with blockchain and mobile tech. He talked about the pace of life there, the food, the colors, the warmth. He said he'd been in Bangkok for 2 months already and planned to stay for a while longer. Maris asked what it was like, and that's when his words painted a picture she couldn't stop replaying in her head. He described floating markets where vendors sold fruit from wooden boats, street corners glowing with lanterns, and temples that made you feel like time had paused. He spoke about riding scooters down narrow roads, laughing with locals who didn't speak English but always offered a smile. She listened like a child hearing a bedtime story for the first time. She imagined herself there, barefoot on a beach, breeze in her hair, no calendar, no clock. She hadn't left the country in her entire life. The furthest she'd ever been was California for a church convention in the early 90s. She told him she didn't even have a passport until 3 years ago. He laughed gently and said, "Well, maybe it's time to use it." From that night on, Thailand wasn't just a place. It became a possibility. He'd drop it into conversations more often. Casual, teasing, suggestive. "If you were here, I'd show you the best green curry in the city. You'd love the view from my balcony. One day, maybe I'll convince you to come out here." And every time the idea crept a little further into her mind, it wasn't about running away. It was about finally saying yes to something. She didn't know yet how serious he was. She didn't know what kind of door she was standing in front of, but she felt it opening, slowly, quietly. And for the first time in years, she didn't want to close it. On the morning of June 18th, 2021, Maris sat at her kitchen table with a mug of black coffee and a small yellow notepad. The sun filtered softly through the blinds. Her bags weren't packed yet, but her decision was already set in stone. She stared at her phone for a long time before pressing call. Celine picked up almost immediately. The sound of her daughter's voice, rushed but warm, always made her smile. They talked for a few minutes about nothing in particular. The heat, the price of gas, some news about a cousin's baby shower. Then Maris cleared her throat. She didn't rush it. She never did. "I'm going to Thailand," she said quietly, almost like she was asking permission. Celine paused on the other end. "What?" Maris repeated it, firmer this time. She told her about the ticket, the date, the flight from Atlanta connecting through Tokyo, then into Bangkok. She told her she'd be gone for 10 days, maybe a little more. She'd already researched the weather, the hotel, the things she wanted to see. She spoke with a mix of excitement and calm, the kind of voice she used when she wanted her children to feel safe, even if they didn't agree with her. Celine didn't take it well. Wait, hold on. Thailand? With who?" Her voice rose. "You don't know him like that, Mama. You've never met this man in real life." Maris tried to reassure her, told her they'd been talking every day for weeks, that he made her laugh, that he made her feel remembered, that she was tired of standing still. She said it softly, with all the emotions she kept hidden in her journal. But Celine wasn't convinced. She asked questions. Good questions. Where was he from? What was his last name? Did anyone else know she was going? Did she even have a contact number for the U.S. Embassy? She reminded her mother of all the stories she'd read. Scams, disappearances, women being tricked and stranded in foreign places. She begged her to at least wait, to let someone go with her, to think it over one more week. But Maris's mind was made up. She didn't yell. She didn't argue. She just said one sentence, quiet but full of weight. "Baby, this might be the first time I've felt alive in 10 years. Celine fell silent. And in that silence, something shifted. The line didn't disconnect, but the space between them widened. Maris promised she'd be safe. She'd text as soon as she landed. She'd send pictures. She said she loved her, that she knew what she was doing, that everything was fine. They hung up. Later that evening, Maris sat on her bed, the light dim and warm, folding blouses into a small carry-on. She packed carefully, more than she needed, but not too much. She placed a travel-sized Bible in the front pocket, printed her itinerary, wrote down Austin's number and address on paper, just in case her phone died. She moved slower than usual, not out of fear, but intention. She called John, too, told him she was taking a break, said she needed a little me time. He didn't push. He told her to be careful, to enjoy herself. He assumed it was a wellness trip or something with the church. He didn't ask many questions. She didn't offer many details. On the morning of June 24th, 2021, Maris stepped out of her house in a white button-up blouse, beige linen pants, and flat sandals. She wore a gold bracelet Thomas had given her for their 15th anniversary. She looked elegant, peaceful. Her neighbor, Mrs. Howard, saw her walking to the rideshare car and waved. Maris waved back. At Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, she checked in 3 hours early. She bought a bottle of water and a book she likely wouldn't finish. She sat near gate E23, watching couples take selfies, families manage toddlers, solo travelers scroll through phones. She sent Austin a selfie, smiling, eyes bright. Text read, "I made it, baby. I'm at the airport." That was the last time anyone saw her in the United States. When the plane touched down in Bangkok, it was just after 6:15 p.m. local time, June 25, 2021. Flight records confirm Maris cleared immigration. A customs officer remembered her, a polite woman in loose white clothes clutching a blue folder, smiling but clearly exhausted from the long journey. She passed through the airport without incident, collected her luggage, and exited the arrival gate alone. She had told Austin she'd land around this time. She expected to see him waiting, maybe holding a small sign with her name on it, maybe with flowers or just open arms. Instead, there was nothing. No familiar face. No one looking for her. Still, Maris wasn't the kind to panic. She stepped aside and pulled out her phone. The text had been sent from the terminal before takeoff. "I made it, baby. I'm at the airport." She expected a response. Something. But the screen stayed still, no bubbles, no red receipt. She waited a few minutes, then tried calling. The first time, it rang endlessly. The second time, the call dropped. The third time, it went straight to voicemail. She waited longer, tried again. Nothing. And then her phone went quiet. At first, it could have been anything. A dead battery, a SIM card issue, a network glitch in a foreign country. But that silence didn't end after an hour. Or two. Or overnight. It stretched, and it never broke. Back in Atlanta, John didn't worry right away. His mom wasn't big on texting constantly. Maybe she was tired. Maybe she was settling in. It wasn't until the next morning, his time, that he started feeling something was off. He texted, then called. No response. He called again. Left a voicemail. Still nothing. By the time evening hit, the panic had fully set in. He started calling her hotel, the one she had emailed him about days before. But they had no record of Amorous Lane ever checking in. Not that night. Not the next. Nothing under her name. No reservation. No guest match. He double-checked the itinerary. Triple-checked the airline. Confirmed the flight landed on time. She should have been there. Should have checked in. Should have called. But she didn't. He reached out to his sister. Celine was already on edge. She hadn't heard from her either. She immediately tried Austin's number. The one her mother had casually shared weeks before. It didn't even ring. Just clicked. Then silence. That was when John called the U.S. Embassy in Bangkok. He didn't have time for introductions. His voice cracked as he tried to explain everything at once. His mother had landed. She was missing. She wasn't the type to just disappear. She was responsible. She had planned this whole thing. She told them she was going to meet a man named Austin. Young. American. But based in Thailand. That's all they knew. They didn't even have his last name. The embassy logged the report, gave a reference number, promised to look into it, but the next few hours felt like years. The first 24 hours? No answers. Then 48. Nothing changed. At 72 hours, the response was still the same. We're working on it. But there were no updates. No alerts. No indication that anyone had seen her since stepping off that plane. John kept calling. Celine couldn't sleep. Sonia tried to reassure them. Said maybe she just needed time to get her footing. But deep down, no one believed that anymore. She had told them she would send a photo from the hotel. She had promised to call once she settled in. Maris wasn't careless. She wasn't impulsive. And she wasn't silent. And yet, she was gone. Just like that. A flight that landed. A phone that stopped responding. A name no hotel recognized. A man no one could reach. And somewhere on the other side of the world, a mother who had once promised she'd be home soon was now nowhere to be found. By the 5th day of silence, John Lane could no longer sit still. He had done everything the embassy told him to do. Filed the missing persons report. Contacted Thai police. Forwarded every message, screenshot, and detail he could gather. But nothing was moving fast enough. Every night, he sat in his apartment in Chicago, staring at a photo of his mother smiling at her retirement party, wondering how someone so grounded could vanish like smoke in a foreign country. He opened her laptop, the one she had left behind on the dining table in Atlanta. She hadn't even password protected it, as if she thought she'd be back before anyone needed to open it. He clicked through the emails first, scanned through her inbox. Most of it was newsletters and payment reminders, but tucked between them were message alerts from the dating apps. One in particular stood out. Where she had matched with Austin C., John clicked into it. Read their conversations, line by line. There were voice notes, inside jokes, love poems, promises. Then came the photos, perfectly curated. One of Austin on a boat, another at a tech conference, one with headphones in front of a laptop. Captioned, CEO in progress. Something didn't sit right. John dropped the photo into a reverse image search tool. It took less than 5 seconds. The same photo came up attached to 5 different names on 5 different platforms. One profile claimed he was a music producer in Miami. Another said he was a personal trainer in Dubai. Same smile, same pose, same shirt. This wasn't just a fake profile. This was a pattern. He ran the rest of the images. All of them were recycled, pulled from social media accounts belonging to influencers and stock photo databases. None of them traced back to a named Austin Caleb. The name didn't exist. Celine jumped in too. She began scanning message timestamps. Looking at the metadata, she noticed that some of the messages had come in while her mother was asleep, and that the phone numbers he used had changed 3 times over the course of 6 weeks. They dug through her notes, looking for anything, any detail he might have shared about his background. A last name, a company, an address, but there was nothing solid. Just stories. Vague, feel-good lines that sounded beautiful in the moment, but led nowhere when you tried to check them. John couldn't take it anymore. He hired a private investigator, someone with international experience, someone who had handled cases that started with a name and ended with a courtroom. It took the investigator just 2 days to trace the email address linked to Austin, the one he used to communicate through the dating app. That email had been flagged before. Not once, not twice, but 17 times. Each case followed the same thread. Older women, promises of love, conversations that escalated quickly, and then a request to meet or send money or book a ticket. In 3 of those cases, the victims had reported losing large amounts of money. One had been left stranded in Morocco. Another went missing in the Philippines for 2 days before being found disoriented near a port. The investigator pulled the data. The phone numbers were masked using foreign VoIP services. The photos were fake. The social media accounts tied to the name Austin Caleb were all recently created and mostly inactive. It was a ghost identity, carefully built to appear charming and harmless. But it wasn't built to last. It was built to lure. And once that was done, it was discarded and replaced. John sat in stunned silence. His mother hadn't just fallen for a scammer. She had fallen into a trap that had been laid out long before she even logged on to the app. This man, whoever he was, had done this before, probably dozens of times. He wasn't just pretending. He was working. And now, with every new piece of information, it became clear. The man Maris trusted wasn't who he said he was. And if she had truly gone to meet him, then whatever happened next wasn't just an accident. It was planned. It came through as a plain text email with no signature, no return address, and no follow-up. Just 12 words, typed in lowercase, that would rip the floor out from under everything the Lane family thought they knew. Check the Lon Kai district. Americans don't leave there alive. The message arrived at the U.S. Embassy in Bangkok at 2:14 a.m., buried among reports, visa inquiries, and security updates. But once flagged, it shot to the top of the pile, because it didn't read like a guess. It didn't sound like concern. It sounded like a warning, one that came too late. When the embassy relayed the message to John and Celine, the room fell quiet. Lon Kai wasn't mentioned on any of Maris' itinerary documents. It wasn't listed in the travel emails she forwarded before leaving. But within an hour of digging, embassy staff confirmed that several foreign women had disappeared in or near that same district in recent years. 3 American retirees, a European nurse, a Canadian missionary's wife. Only one had ever resurfaced, barefoot, bloodied, and missing both kidneys. She had collapsed in front of a temple after wandering for 2 days, her only words before fainting. They said I was sold. Back in the States, John's hands shook as he reviewed his mother's texts. Celine printed every single photo Maris had sent in the days leading up to her flight. They weren't just trying to piece together a timeline anymore. They were racing against it. The private investigator turned his focus toward deeper sources. Message boards, trafficking watch lists, data leaks from romance scam networks. That's when the fragments began forming something much larger than just a scam. It wasn't just that the man calling himself Austin Caleb was fake. It was that he had been fake for a long time. A former scammer turned paid informant confirmed it first. The face, the language patterns, the phrases used in his messages. All of them matched a known trafficker operating out of Southeast Asia, an African national who had relocated under a forged visa at age 21 and never left. He didn't go by one name. He used many, each identity carefully crafted for a different demographic. In Western Europe, he was Andre. In South America, Lucas. On the apps used by older American women, Austin Caleb. The stories were always different. The strategy was always the same. He would build trust slowly, never ask for money up front. He avoided sloppy mistakes. He didn't use pressure. He used attention, compliments, consistency. He studied the women he targeted, reviewed their public posts, liked old photos, learned their routines. Then he gave them exactly what they thought had been missing. For Maris, it was warmth, a voice, companionship. But for him, it was inventory. One cybercrime expert working with the embassy said it plainly. They don't just steal money, they steal bodies. They sell hope, and they deliver human flesh. It felt impossible, but the data confirmed the pattern. Over the course of 3 years, 3 other women, aged between 55 and 70, had vanished after meeting this same man under different names. One had bought a plane ticket with her retirement savings. One had left a letter for her son saying, "I think I've finally found the one." None of them were ever seen again. And then came the case in the Philippines. A woman who narrowly escaped after a hotel manager refused to let her leave with the man she came to meet. The manager said something felt off. She called local police. When they arrived, the man had disappeared through a side exit. The woman later confirmed his face matched the one Maris had sent to her children. The informant said this wasn't an accident. It was an enterprise. He worked in cycles. 6 weeks of contact, then a setup, then extraction. He didn't travel himself anymore. He stayed in high-rise condos in Bangkok and Chiang Rai, paying locals to manage pickups, rooms, and logistics. He never touched the victim directly, but everything led back to him, and Maris Lane had walked directly into his system. She wasn't the first, and if they didn't act fast, she wouldn't be the last. The address led investigators to a narrow street on the far edges of Chiang Rai, northern Thailand. Quiet, unmarked, surrounded by dense trees and uneven pavement. On the map, it looked like any budget lodging option. Modest, tucked away from tourist routes, listed online as a guest house for solo travelers. But there was no official signage, no working phone number, and no website. When embassy officials arrived with local authorities, the building was already empty. Inside, the walls were bare, mattresses stripped, drawers missing handles. There was no front desk, just a side entrance with a keypad lock and a narrow hallway with 3 rooms, each without windows. The owner? Unreachable. The name on the lease? Fake. But the security system, what was left of it, still held something. Footage dated June 25, 2021, 7:03 p.m. A local taxi driver had remembered her. He told police through a translator that she seemed polite. Called her, a kind older black woman. Said she asked questions about temples on the way in, and thanked him twice for helping with her luggage. He dropped her at the guest house. Said 2 men were already standing outside, as if they were waiting. The footage confirmed it. Maris stepped out of the cab holding her purse in one hand and a printed folder in the other. She wore soft beige linen pants and a loose white top, sunglasses resting at the neckline. Her steps were steady but uncertain. The 2 men didn't speak to the driver. They didn't greet her with affection. They simply gestured for her to follow. She hesitated at first, then stepped inside. The time code, 7:05 p.m. She was never seen again. Not by that camera. Not by any camera. Not by anyone. 2 hours later, at 9:14 p.m., the door opened again. This time, it was just one man. The same one she had been calling Austin. He walked out calmly. Baseball cap pulled low. Glasses. A surgical mask. He held a black duffel bag in one hand, slung over his shoulder. It looked heavy. He didn't rush. He didn't look back. He walked directly to a white sedan parked just out of frame. The engine was already running. He slid into the passenger seat. The car pulled off without headlights. 2 days later, the digital money trail lit up. An anonymous blockchain tip, submitted to a private cyber forensics unit, showed a $5,000 cryptocurrency transfer, made to a wallet address, connected to the same email Maris had once used to send him pictures of her garden. The transaction had a note attached in Thai. Translated, it read, "Delivery confirmed. Payment complete." That was the moment everything changed. A second witness, an ex-scammer turned state informant, provided further testimony through an encrypted session. He had worked under the same trafficking ring for nearly a year before breaking ties. His words were blunt. They don't just kill, they butcher, and they're paid to make it clean. According to his statement, organs weren't harvested in hospitals. They were done in makeshift setups. Cleaner than you'd think. Quieter than anyone would guess. No one asked names. Just weight, blood type, gender. If the body showed signs of illness, the payout dropped. If not, the payout came quick, usually within 48 hours. The Lane family received one more message. This time, through an encrypted email routed through 3 different countries. No greeting, no signature, just 3 attachments. The first was a blurred screenshot of a message thread on a dark marketplace board. A broker confirming receipt of a healthy female, age 60 plus, blood work verified, payout cleared. The second image was worse. It was a catalog photo, taken from above, of various rings, bracelets, and earrings placed on a white towel for resale. And there, unmistakable, resting beside a gold cross pendant, was Maris Lane's wedding ring. Celine had the original. Her mother never traveled without it. She'd worn it for 27 years, even after her husband passed. She called it the promise that outlived the man. And now, it was being sold anonymously online for the equivalent of $83. That single photo confirmed what no one had wanted to accept. Maris Lane was no longer missing. She had been sold piece by piece. And the man who made her laugh at midnight, who told her she was his queen, who said, "Come find me, I'll be waiting," was never waiting at all. He was collecting. The moment the photo of Maris' wedding ring surfaced in a black market catalog, the case shifted from a missing persons file to something far more urgent. The embassy escalated. The Lane family's investigator submitted his final findings. A full report was pushed through every available channel. And just 6 days after that image went public, Interpol joined the case. They weren't just looking for a man with a fake name. They were tracing the shadow of a network. One that spanned across borders, operated through burner phones and encrypted channels, and left no survivors to testify. But this time they had digital footprints. A victim with a face. A family that wouldn't let go. And a scammer who had finally gotten sloppy. Within 2 weeks, a joint task force involving Interpol, the FBI, and Thai Federal Police launched coordinated sweeps across northern Thailand. What they uncovered wasn't a single room or hideout, but a chain. 3 Thai officials were arrested. One was a mid-level immigration officer who had flagged Maris' arrival as non-standard in exchange for payment. The second was a registrar who had falsified guest house documents tied to 2 of the missing victims. The third was a local transport officer who admitted to looking the other way during questionable pickups arranged by men with foreign clients. Each of them denied involvement at first, but once shown the messages, bribes, coded communications, false names, they started talking. All of it led back to one man, the person Maris had known as Austin. And now, with global surveillance tracking his name across multiple jurisdictions, every camera in the region was watching. It didn't take long to find him. July 11th, 2021. A camera above an outdoor ATM in Chiang Mai pinged a match. Facial recognition confirmed the ID. Same man. Different hat. Different city. He had slipped through the cracks. Barely. But he was still using money. Still moving. The footage showed him withdrawing cash in small amounts, spreading out the activity over 3 machines. But what stood out wasn't the withdrawal. It was the phone in his hand. When the footage was enhanced, analysts identified the Telegram logo glowing on the screen. Encrypted chats. Untraceable numbers. That was his domain. The FBI's cybercrime unit, working in tandem with Thai officials, launched a coordinated search through Telegram metadata and Tinder activity logs. The apps didn't give up much directly, but once they obtained warrants and gained access to archived usage logs from burner accounts linked to his email, the movement became clear. He hadn't just been targeting Maris. In the 6 months leading up to her death, He had messaged over 48 women across 4 continents. Most were over the age of 55. Most widowed. Most living alone. He had multiple profiles. Different names. Same approach. His Tinder logs revealed dozens of matches tied to GPS coordinates near expat communities and senior living zones in Mexico, Spain, South Africa, and the US. The chat history followed the same arc. Romantic interest, personal connection, and eventually an invitation. Telegram gave even more. A decrypted export, obtained through a seized device from a local accomplice, showed conversations labeled only by initials. But one thread was timestamped June 25, 2021, the same night Maris vanished. The message read, "Delivery is here. She's in the room." Then, 35 minutes later, leaving in 2 hours. Send the next half. Authorities now had timeline, location, motive, transaction. They had everything except him. But now they knew exactly where to look. His face was circulated across every entry port and transport hub. The FBI issued a red notice. Local authorities raided 7 addresses linked to the phones used under his fake profiles. His network was shrinking, and the trail, finally, was closing in. And for the first time since Maris boarded that flight, the question was no longer what happened to her. It was how soon can we get to him before someone else disappears. August 3, 2021. It was just after 6 a.m. when officers moved in. The sky over Bangkok was still gray, the city not yet awake. But in the Sukhumvit district, known for its high-end condos and quiet expat pockets, one building on Soi 24 had already been surrounded. 15 floors up behind a reinforced steel door with an imported digital lock, Austin, or the man using that name, was sitting alone in a luxury rental suite. Marble floors, blackout drapes, a panoramic view of the skyline behind him. He had no idea the elevator below had been disabled or that plainclothes officers were already moving up the stairwells, floor by floor. Inside, the blinds were still drawn. A pot of instant noodles sat untouched on the counter. The only sound was the soft tapping of laptop keys. He wasn't messaging anyone. He wasn't scrolling. He was wiping drives, transferring data, deleting folders. He had done this before, enough times to know which files to prioritize when time was running out. But this time he was too late. 6:17 a.m. The tactical unit breached the door. Flash entry, one warning, no struggle. They found him crouched at a sleek black desk, still wearing house slippers, fingers frozen over the trackpad. He looked up, confused but not surprised, just like someone who had already accepted that the knock would come eventually. He was restrained without incident. No weapons on site, no backup IDs in reach, just the laptop, still open, still warm. What they recovered was more than they expected. The hard drive held everything. Encrypted files, some obvious, some buried. Folders marked with dates, some with initials. Inside, dozens of photographs, screenshots of chats with women across the globe, most of them smiling, some holding boarding passes, others seated in airport lounges, unaware they were being documented. Maris was there, 2 pictures. One from a video call, the same one she'd once described to her daughter as the night she knew she wasn't alone anymore. And another from outside the guest house. Zoomed in, taken from inside the building. The timestamp matched her arrival to the minute. There were transaction logs, too. Spreadsheets coded with alias names, wallet IDs, crypto transfers, dollar amounts, payout notes. Maris' file was marked. Completed. $5,000. They also recovered archived Telegram chats. Most were in code, but the tone was unmistakable. Conversations with middlemen, dates, descriptions, instructions. In one, he corrected someone on how to clean up better next time. Another asked if the old woman's ID had been burned or kept. The reply? Destroyed. She won't be traced. Within hours, his face was broadcast on national news. International trafficker arrested in Bangkok. Connected to American widow disappearance. Under investigation for cross-border targeting of elderly women. John Lane received the call that night. There was no joy in it. No relief. Just confirmation that the man who made his mother feel wanted had profited off her death. Austin was processed under his real name. No aliases. No more hiding. He was charged with human trafficking, wire fraud, document falsification, conspiracy to commit transnational crime, and unlawful disposal of human remains. He said nothing during the interrogation. Didn't ask for a lawyer. Didn't deny the charges. Didn't explain. He just sat still, hands folded, waiting. Because for men like him, arrest isn't the end. It's just the moment the world finally catches up. January 7th, 2022. Bangkok Criminal Court was surrounded by press vans and barricades by sunrise. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Rows of wooden benches were filled by diplomats from the U.S. Embassy, members of Thailand's anti-trafficking task force, journalists from 3 continents, and advocates who had flown in from as far as South Africa and Canada. They came with photos pinned to their jackets, faces of other women who had vanished the same way Maris Lane had. Her name was now part of something larger. But this wasn't a memorial. This was a reckoning. Austin was escorted into the courtroom just after 9 a.m., dressed in pale brown prison-issued clothes. Wrists cuffed. Expression blank. No family showed up for him. No attorney by his side. He had chosen to represent himself. Not out of courage, but control. He didn't flinch when the charges were read aloud. Trafficking of foreign nationals. Conspiracy to commit transnational organized crime. Wire fraud. Falsification of documents. Destruction of remains. And the murder of Maris Lane. He stood still, hands behind his back, as if listening to a weather report. The prosecution began with the timeline. They played CCTV footage. The guest house. The ATM. The image of Maris stepping out of the taxi and following the 2 men. It silenced the room. They submitted the crypto payment log tied directly to the organ sale. They revealed the telegram transcripts, naming contact after contact. And when they reached the moment her ring was identified in the auction photo, Celine left the courtroom in tears. Still, Austin didn't look away. When asked if he had anything to say in his defense, he finally spoke. He didn't deny the messages. He didn't deny knowing Maris. He didn't deny the crypto transfer. Instead, he leaned into the microphone, glanced toward the rows of observers, and said she knew the risks. Everyone does. No one gets on a plane for nothing. Gasps filled the room. One advocate had to be escorted out after yelling, "You preyed on her." The judge ordered silence. But the tone of the trial had already changed. There would be no apology, no remorse, no second guessing. The sentence was delivered the following week. Life imprisonment, without parole, permanent restriction from all forms of communication, a recommendation for extradition to stand trial in other nations, pending international tribunal decisions. He blinked, didn't speak, and just like that he was escorted out through a steel door, alone, without handshakes, without a final word. The chair he had occupied stayed empty long after he left. And the room, so heavy with truth, didn't clap, didn't cheer, just sat in silence. Because justice, when it finally came, didn't feel like victory. It felt like a sentence. For everyone. Maris Lane thought she was chasing love. Thought she was finally stepping into a new season of her life. Thought she had found someone who saw her for who she truly was. A woman still full of warmth. Still capable of giving and receiving love. Still deserving of being chosen. But what she walked into wasn't a homecoming. It wasn't a second chance. It was a transaction. It was a market. Cold, calculated, and waiting. A place where names are erased, promises are recycled, and women like Maris are not courted. They're catalogued. In that world, hearts aren't broken. They're extracted, priced, and moved in silence. She wasn't looking for attention. She wasn't reckless. She had lived carefully her entire life. Worked hard, raised her kids, buried her husband, prayed her way through quiet nights. But in the end, all it took was one man who spoke kindly, replied consistently, and offered a dream wrapped in false tenderness. That was all it took to pull her across the ocean. And once she landed, everything she believed was real began to vanish. Starting with her voice, then her presence, and finally her life. He didn't meet her at the gate. He didn't carry her bag. He never intended to hold her hand. Only to mark her as received. She wasn't the first. She wasn't even the only one that month. And if nothing changes, she won't be the last. If you or someone you know is talking to someone overseas and everything feels too easy, too fast, too perfect, stop and ask the hard questions. Search their photos. Verify their names. Share the information with someone you trust. Because what starts with a simple hello can end in a closed casket, an unanswered phone, a folder full of lies, and a family left trying to piece together the last few days of someone they'll never see again. This story could have ended differently. It could have ended with her return, her stories of adventure, her photos of temples and street food and sunsets over the sea. But it didn't. And the difference between life and death in her case wasn't fate. It was silence. One question unasked. One hesitation swallowed. One voice not raised in time. So if something feels off, listen to that feeling. Talk to someone. Investigate. Don't let comfort be the thing that blinds you. Story 6. Once hailed as a future star in the world of League of Legends, Lee Chanju brutally murdered his girlfriend in a hotel room. The dazzling spotlight that once made him a focal point of admiration faded after a quiet retirement, giving way to a man spiraling out of control, suspected of public indecency. Bipolar disorder, illicit substances, and uncontrollable desires converged in room 6012 in just 10 fleeting minutes. What exactly happened in that moment? On the afternoon of May 30th, 2024, at a hotel in Ba Jin Square, Hanoi, Vietnam, staff were stunned to find a naked young man climbing the exterior of the 65-story building, showing signs of intending to jump. Thanks to the swift intervention of hotel security, he was rescued. However, he continued to wander aimlessly, unable to respond coherently to questions, visibly agitated, in a frenzied state, and repeatedly attempting to attack others. Faced with this volatile situation, the hotel had no choice but to alert the police. When officers arrived and verified the guest registry, they identified the man as Lee Chanju, a South Korean tourist staying in room 6012. But the real shock came when they escorted him back to his room, where they discovered a victim's body. The police immediately arrested Lee Chanju as the prime suspect. He quickly confessed to the killing, revealing the victim was his girlfriend, Park Hyun-ah. According to the autopsy report, the cause of death was asphyxiation from a pillow pressed over her face. Her forehead and face bore multiple contusions from blunt force trauma, and injuries to her abdomen and pelvis indicated she had been savagely beaten before her death. Notably, a 17-centimeter scratch across her neck suggested a fierce struggle as she fought against being choked. A large bruise on the inner left thigh hinted at an attempt by the suspect to commit sexual assault. Despite her desperate resistance, the stark physical disparity left her no chance, and she was tragically overpowered. As expected, Lee Chanju admitted his motive stemmed from Park Hyun-ah's refusal to engage in a romantic relationship. However, he later retracted this statement, claiming the true reason was his discovery that Park Hyun-ah had previously worked in prostitution, which made him feel betrayed. This led to a heated argument, and in a moment of lost control, he claimed to have unintentionally killed her. After committing this heinous crime, he fled to the hotel's 65th floor with the intent to end his own life, only to be stopped by hotel security. When police investigated Lee Chanju's background, they were astonished to learn he was once a professional League of Legends player, a celebrated figure in South Korea known by his in-game alias, Yaharong. After confirming the victim's identity and cause of death, the South Korean embassy in Vietnam promptly notified Park Hyun-ah's family. Her parents, reeling from the news, couldn't believe their ears. Just the day before, their daughter had called to say she was on a business trip. How could she have been killed in a foreign land? Suspecting a scam, they contacted local police to verify. Authorities confirmed Park Hyun-ah had indeed been murdered in Vietnam, and an investigation into the incident was underway. Hotel surveillance footage from 12:54 p.m. that day showed Park Hyun-ah and Lee Chanju checking in at the lobby, hand in hand, appearing like any affectionate couple on a vacation. Curiously, in several frames, Lee Chanju was barefoot, carrying his shoes in his hand throughout their movements. At 1:09 p.m., they took the elevator to the 60th floor and entered room 6012. No one could have predicted that this would be the last recorded image of Park Hyun-ah alive. When the door to room 6012 closed, an irreversible tragedy unfolded. Just 10 minutes later, Lee Chanju burst out of the room and bolted toward the hotel's rooftop. News of a former professional esports player killing his girlfriend in Vietnam quickly spread to South Korea, sending shockwaves through the public. Soon after, two even more staggering revelations emerged. Given Lee Chanju's erratic behavior, Vietnamese authorities suspected mental health issues and ordered a psychological evaluation, with results still pending. Additionally, a drug test revealed he tested positive for an illicit substance, though the specific type remains unidentified. Could these substances have directly triggered his actions? This question awaits further investigation and expert analysis from Vietnamese authorities. However, signs of Lee Chanju's mental health struggles had surfaced long before, with his condition deteriorating over time. For those familiar with League of Legends, the game needs no introduction. As a cornerstone of esports for years, it holds immense popularity in South Korea, bolstered by robust support from the government, media, and society. This has fostered a thriving esports ecosystem, giving rise to the Professional League of Legends Championship, Korea, LCK. From this crucible emerged many legendary players, including the central figure of this case, Lee Chan-ju, a professional player from the 2000s generation, known in-game as Yeharong. Born on June 12, 2000 in Seoul, South Korea, Lee Chan-ju was captivated by esports from a young age. By his first year of middle school, at just 13, he set his sights on becoming a professional player. Adopting the ID Yeharong, inspired by a greeting from the female protagonist in a popular Japanese light novel, he displayed prodigious talent from the outset. His only barrier to a professional career was his age, as tournaments, often broadcast live, required players to be at least 17. In high school, Lee Chan-ju devoted himself entirely to rigorous training, honing his skills at an elite level. Among over 3 million players on the Korean server at the time, Lee Chan-ju rose to the top ranks, showcasing undeniable potential. In 2016, as a sophomore, he dropped out of school. That August, he joined Keg Seoul as an amateur player. By 2017, upon turning 17 and meeting the tournament age requirement, he signed with Jean Air Green Wings, a team competing in Professional League of Legends. Taking on the role of starting mid laner, he was hailed by experts as one of the most promising young talents. Yet, his career was marked by turbulence. Due to shifting regulations and policies, JAG disbanded on November 17, 2020. In 2021, Lee Chan-ju was recruited by a prominent team, but was relegated to a substitute role with little chance to shine. After the 2021 season, he left the team, leaving minimal personal impact. Frustrated by repeated setbacks in South Korea, he sought new opportunities in Japan. Starting in the 2022 season, he joined Detonatio and Focus Me, DFM, a top team in the League of Legends Japan League, LJL, as their primary mid laner. Here, Lee Chan-ju entered the peak of his professional career, delivering standout performances and etching his name in memorable matches deemed classics. He was even lauded by the media as one of the top 6 mid laners in the region. When asked about his feelings after winning his first championship, Lee Chan-ju exclaimed, "It feels incredible. Absolutely exhilarating." However, at the 2022 League of Legends World Championship, Detonatio and Focus Me, DFM, was eliminated in the play-in stage, with Lee Chan-ju performing well below his usual standard. His morale visibly shattered. After the 2022 season, his contract with DFM expired, and he did not join any other team thereafter. At just 22 years old, Yeharong, the mid laner once touted as a future star, quietly retired, stepping away from the esports world entirely. From a promising professional player, Lee Chan-ju plummeted into unemployment, with no foothold left in the competitive gaming scene. In 2023, during a gathering at a friend's house, he met a woman 9 years his senior, Park Hae-euna. Born in 1991, Park Hae-euna was deeply connected to her parents, gracious with friends, dutiful, and brimming with a zest for life. After studying abroad in Australia, she began working at a company in Busan. From their first encounter, Lee Chan-ju pursued Park Hae-euna with fervent, almost obsessive passion. Her close friends were aware of this younger man, a former esports player with some renown under the alias Yeharong. By December 2023, though the couple never publicly confirmed their relationship, their everyday interactions left friends convinced they were romantically involved. It wasn't until April in 2024 that Park Hae-euna first mentioned the relationship to her parents, describing a younger man pursuing her with intense devotion. Neither her friends nor family were concerned, trusting that Hae-euna's maturity, composure, and discernment would prevent her from entering a relationship without careful consideration. Yet, some people present a flawless facade while concealing a volatile, dangerous life beneath the surface. In 2023, Lee Chan-ju had been diagnosed with bipolar I disorder, a severe mental health condition that also exempted him from South Korea's mandatory military service. Remarkably, this diagnosis came as a surprise, as he had shown no overt abnormalities during his professional gaming career. The diagnosis stemmed from an incident in April 2023, post-retirement, when Lee Chan-ju made headlines for erratic behavior tied to his condition. On April 15, 2023, in Seoul's Gangnam district, the owner of a nail salon received a booking call from a man asking if he could get a manicure and scheduling a visit. The call itself was unusual, as male clients were rare, but the salon owner thought little of it. The true shock came during the service. The client was extraordinarily peculiar. On April 16th, Lee Chan-ju arrived at the salon at 7 p.m. According to the owner, the manicure took about 40 minutes. Throughout, Lee Chan-ju made unsettling remarks such as, "It smells so nice, so soothing," delivered in an oddly soft, exaggeratedly coy tone, a mannerism in Korean culture that felt jarring and discomforting. The salon owner endured it, completing the service, but Lee Chan-ju showed no intention of paying or leaving. Instead, he grew frenzied, switching seats repeatedly, muttering incoherent phrases no one could decipher. At the time, only the owner and one other female customer were present. They exchanged uneasy glances, whispering, "What's wrong with this guy?" Then, Lee Chan-ju's actions escalated into outright terror. He abruptly climbed onto a salon treatment bed, swiftly stripped off all his clothes, and lay naked, his face radiating a disturbing satisfaction, resembling a perverse exhibitionist. The owner, frozen in shock, trembled as she warned, "Put your clothes back on immediately. This behavior is unacceptable here." Despite her pleas, Lee Chan-ju remained motionless, stark naked, unmoved by her words. Left with no choice, the owner called the police. Officers arrived swiftly, detaining Lee Chan-ju. The incident became a social news story, widely reported by media outlets, which highlighted his identity as a former professional League of Legends player, while withholding his real name. Subsequent drug tests came back negative. However, after police intervention, Lee Chan-ju showed no awareness of the gravity of his actions, even repeatedly contacting the salon to book follow-up appointments, all of which were firmly rejected. Friends later confronted him about the incident, but his responses were mooder. His explanations were muddled and incoherent, claiming he acted on impulse, driven by overwhelming excitement and uncontrollable urges. In later live streams, viewers noticed further abnormalities, slurred speech, glassy eyes, and incessant erratic movements. Post-retirement, Lee Chan-ju's increasingly bizarre and harmful behavior, coupled with significant weight loss over 2 years, prompted his family to take his mental health seriously. With their support, he was diagnosed with bipolar I disorder, a severe condition marked by delusions, impulsivity, loss of control, and intense manic episodes that can lead to unpredictable, even dangerous actions. His father revealed that in the 6 months following the diagnosis, Lee Chan-ju underwent outpatient treatment, requiring monthly injections. However, he vehemently resisted medication and therapy. During his first treatment, his father had to restrain him to administer the injection. It was during this treatment period that Lee Chan-ju met and ardently pursued Park Hyun-ah, eventually entering a romantic relationship. Whether Park Hyun-ah was fully aware of his mental health condition remains unclear. However, she confided to friends that Lee Chan-ju frequently exhibited rude behavior, lashing out unprovoked, and displaying other erratic tendencies, leading her to contemplate ending the relationship. Yet, she hesitated, pitying his apparent vulnerability and fragility. Unable to make a definitive break, treating mental illness requires long-term, meticulous care and unwavering commitment. But Lee Chan-ju consistently resisted both medication and therapy. After the crime, his father admitted to the media that their disagreements over medication often sparked conflicts. He also acknowledged lapses in oversight, allowing Lee Chan-ju to miss doses. This inconsistent treatment likely exacerbated his condition. On May 27, 2024, during a routine call with her parents, Park Hyun-ah sounded exhausted, though her family dismissed it as minor. In reality, Lee Chan-ju was entering the onset of a manic episode. In chat messages, Park Hyun-ah wrote, "I really don't understand what he's saying anymore." By May 28th, his mental state grew dangerously unstable, rapidly deteriorating into a severe, uncontrollable breakdown. Noncompliance with medication triggered delusions, culminating in an irreparable tragedy. At 9:58 p.m. on May 28th, 2024, Lee Chan-ju, shirtless and barefoot, ran to a police station claiming, "Someone keeps staring at me. I'm scared, so I came here for help." When asked who, he replied, "That person, the convenience store clerk." His speech became incoherent, jumping erratically, rendering normal communication impossible. Police contacted his father, who picked him up. By 4 a.m. on May 29th, Park Hyun-ah, concerned for her boyfriend, continued texting him, but his replies were chaotic, devoid of clarity or focus. Around the same time, Lee Chan-ju's condition spiraled further. He texted his father, demanding, "Transfer money to my account. Urgently." His father asked, "Where are you?" Lee Chan-ju replied, "At the airport." His father responded, "If you're sober, come home." Only after sending this did he grow alarmed, frantically asking, "Where are you?" After being brought home from the police station, noncompliance with medication plunged Lee Chan-ju into severe delusions. He told his father, "There's an earthquake happening. If I fly and realign the Earth's axis, all earthquakes will stop." Fueled by this bizarre delusion, at 3 a.m., clad only in shorts and a t-shirt, Lee Chan-ju fled his home, heading to Incheon Airport to catch the earliest flight to Vietnam. Even as he reached the airport and texted for money, his father assumed it was mere delirium, unaware that his son's delusions had manifested into reckless reality. On the morning of May 29th, Park Hyun-ah, unable to reach Lee Chan-ju, was unaware he had traveled to Vietnam. She sent messages checking on him. At noon, he finally replied, "Sorry, I'm in Vietnam." Alarmed, she asked, "What's going on?" He provided his father's phone number, instructing her to contact him directly. His brief response came as, upon arriving in Vietnam, he was immediately detained by Vietnamese police. Upon arriving in Hanoi, Lee Chan-ju checked into a hotel, but struggled to communicate with the receptionist, mixing Korean and English in a way that left his requests incomprehensible. Frustrated by the lack of service, he erupted in rage, hurling his phone erratically. After lingering in the lobby, he abruptly bolted outside, vanishing without direction. Moments later, locals witnessed a bizarre spectacle. By the banks of Yenchu Lake, near the hotel, Lee Chan-ju stood stark naked, motionless, staring intently at the water. Onlookers, alarmed by the scene, immediately alerted the police. Officers arrived swiftly, forcibly escorting him to the station. While there, Lee Chan-ju received a message from Park Hyun-ah, urging him to call his father. Whether it was the nude incident at the nail salon or standing exposed by the lake in Vietnam, Lee Chan-ju's bizarre actions consistently hinted at sexual compulsions. Before departing, he had borrowed 500,000 won, approximately $360, from friends to travel to Vietnam. When asked why he suddenly wanted to go, he claimed it was to relieve emotional stress. Following his initial detention, Vietnamese police contacted the South Korean embassy in Vietnam, informing Lee Chan-ju's father of the situation. Only then did his father fully grasp that his son was indeed in Vietnam. Park Hyun-ah promptly reached out to Lee Chan-ju's father, but a puzzling question arose. Why didn't his father, his own flesh and blood, travel to Vietnam to retrieve him? In a later media interview, Lee Chan-ju's father explained he was preoccupied with drafting urgent documents, preventing an immediate trip. He also advised Park Hyun-ah against going, fearing for her safety. Yet, their conversation suggested a different story. On May 29th, Lee Chan-ju's father texted Park Hyun-ah via a messaging app. "You need to go there and bring him back immediately." She replied, "What if I can't find him tomorrow?" He responded, "Don't agitate him. Stay in touch and don't mention the medication." This exchange reveals Lee Chan-ju's intense aversion to his prescribed drugs, likely a source of conflict with his father that drove him to flee. His father then instructed Park Hyun-ah, "When you arrive, buy a bottle of Coca-Cola and mix the medication in it. 2 pills, ideally." Despite knowing his son's fierce resistance to medication, his inability to even hear it mentioned, and his abnormal sexual urges during manic episodes, Lee Chan-ju's father still tasked Park Hyun-ah with administering the drugs, seemingly oblivious to the dangers she faced traveling alone to a foreign country. Initially, Park Hyun-ah had planned to attend a job interview with a new company, but concern for her boyfriend's safety compelled her to prioritize Vietnam. Lee Chan-ju's father sent her money for flights and accommodations, urging her to go first while he assessed the situation. On May 29th, Park Hyun-ah told her parents she needed to make an urgent business trip to Vietnam. Given her job in international trade, they didn't question her. On the morning of May 30th, she boarded a flight to Hanoi. By noon, with assistance from the South Korean embassy, she arrived at the Hanoi police station and bailed Lee Chan-ju out. Intending to return to South Korea that day, she relented when he insisted on resting one more day. Agreeing, they checked into a hotel together, entering room 6012. Within 10 minutes, a tragedy unfolded. Throughout the incident, no clear signs pointed to prior conflict between them. One theory suggests Park Hyun-ah mixed medication into a Coca-Cola, and Lee Chan-ju, discovering this, felt betrayed, triggering his violent outburst. However, given his past arguments with his father over treatment, none of which turned violent, this hypothesis lacks conviction. Yet, The bruise on the victim's inner thigh, indicative of forceful tearing, confirms Lee Chan-ju's heightened sexual agitation. It's likely that, back in the room, he exhibited extreme behavior Park Hyun had never witnessed. He may have attempted to force intimacy, and upon her refusal, lost all control. This aligns with his initial confession. Rejection fueled his emotional frenzy, leading to the murder. Later, he altered his story, baselessly claiming the victim was a sex worker, a claim unsupported by any evidence. Park Hyun-ah's love and concern couldn't reach a man who had lost his humanity. Following the incident, Lee Chan-ju awaits the results of a psychiatric evaluation, while receiving medication to stabilize his condition. If the evaluation deems his mental state severe, he may undergo treatment rather than immediate imprisonment. As the crime occurred in Vietnam, international jurisdiction follows territorial principles, meaning Lee Chan-ju will likely face Vietnamese law. Additionally, his positive drug test introduces another layer, as the substance's influence remains under scrutiny. Officials from Vietnam and South Korea agree that Lee Chan-ju's extradition to South Korea is unlikely. Vietnam's investigation has yielded limited progress, and the motive behind the crime remains unclear. Park Hyun-ah's family has yet to receive an apology from the perpetrator. Lee Chan-ju's father insists his son's actions stem from mental illness or treatment drugs, downplaying the role of illicit substances. He dreads the possibility of his son facing execution in Vietnam, a country with stringent penalties for drug-related crimes. Whether Lee Chan-ju used drugs in South Korea before traveling, consumed them in Vietnam, or how he obtained them will significantly impact his final sentencing. If he brought and used drugs in Vietnam, he could face charges for both murder and drug offenses, potentially leading to life imprisonment or the death penalty. As the rain falls and the night deepens, thank you for being here with me at Radio Night Crime. True crime stories remind us of life's mysteries and the need to stay aware, even in the stillness of the night. If you enjoyed tonight's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let the sound of the rain lull you to sleep, and until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night keep you company.